Chapter 91. Why don't you give it a try? There was a moment of silence at the entrance. After a while, Yen suddenly regained his senses and shouted, "Uncle!" This was this kid's uncle? Sun Ling sized up the youth in front of him. Seeing this young man's handsome appearance and elegant demeanor, he couldn't help but feel jealous. Because of the large birthmark on his face, he knew that he was ugly, so he especially hated good-looking people. He had countless concubines in his residence and often tainted good girls outside. However, it wasn't entirely because he was lustful. Even if he took them in his hands, he would never pamper them. Those beauties often ended up in miserable states in his hands. When Sun Ling saw that someone else had something he didn't have, he wanted to destroy it. The man in front of him was too outstanding. Not only in Liangzhou, but even in Dawei, he could be considered one of the best. "Uncle!" Yen jumped up and ran behind Xiaoju. Only his head poked out and pointed at Sun Ling. "This person bullied me." She shouted innocently, as if she was a child who was bullied outside and went home to complain to her elders. Fei Nu saw this and was speechless. Xiaoju's body also stiffened. He endured the disdain and ignored the person pulling his clothes behind him. He only looked at Sun Ling. "Was it you?" Sun Ling's heart skipped a beat. This young man's appearance was too good. His expression was calm, but there was a hint of sharpness. Even if he was asking a question calmly, one couldn't help but feel a chill in one's heart and feel an inexplicable sense of fear. He composed himself and looked at Xiaoju. He said coldly, "It was me." "Or you?" "Xiaoju." "Xiaoju?" Sun Ling was suspicious. He had never seen Xiaoju before. Half a year ago, he heard that Xiaoju had brought new recruits to Liangzhou to guard the Liangzhou city. However, he had never been to Liangzhou city or the Sun family. Of course, Sun Ling had also heard of Xiaoju's name. He was a famous young killer in Dawei and was handsome and beautiful. His life was good, but other than that, how could he prove that he was a Xiaoju? Moreover, how could the commander-in-chief of the right military force bring only one guard with him? Even though he was the son of a county magistrate, he still had to be surrounded by attendants when he went out. What was up with this nephew of his? No matter what, these people looked strange. Sun Ling asked the manservant beside him in a low voice, "Have you heard about General Feng Yun coming to the city recently?" The servant shook his head. Hearing this, Sun Ling became even more suspicious. However, he had always been cunning and did not want to jump to conclusions so easily. Thus, he looked at Xiaoju and sneered, "Since you say that you are Xiaoju, do you have the jade token to prove your identity?" Xiaoju, no. He didn't even have a jade token. Sun Ling was even more certain that the people in front of him were imposters. Thinking about how he had almost been frightened by the imposter, Sun Ling couldn't help but feel annoyed. He looked at Xiaoju and shouted, "I don't care who you are, but you dared to kidnap an official's wife. This is a capital offense. Mint, take them down." "What official's wife?" Yen poked his head out from behind Xiaoju and shouted, "That's my servant. If you want to say that she's an official's wife, please show evidence. Where's her contract? You don't even have a contract and you're just randomly arresting people. Is there still any law?" "Law?" Sun Ling smiled ferociously. "In Liangzhou, my Sun family is the law. Everyone do it." A group of soldiers came forward aggressively. Yen was now playing the role of the weak Cheng Li Su, so of course, he wouldn't do anything. She screamed and shouted as if she wanted to see the world in chaos. "Murder! Soldiers are killing people." There were other guests in the inn, so when they heard this, there was an uproar. Even the dogs on the streets began to bark. Xiaoju said, "Fei Nu." The guards in black immediately stood in front of Xiaoju, and Yen took the opportunity to see clearly. She didn't know if Fei Nu was a member of the Nine Flags Battalion, but looking at his skills, he was comparable to her in her previous life. If this was the standard of the Nine Flags Battalion, then Lady He's current body was probably not qualified. She couldn't take her eyes off him and pulled Xiaoju's clothes until Xiaoju scolded in a low voice, "Let go." Yen came back to his senses and quickly let go of his hand. Seeing that Yen's sleeve was wrinkled from his grip, he stroked it twice in an attempt to smooth it out. He said fawningly, "Uncle, Big brother Fei Nu is really skilled. Amazing. She didn't even need to think about it. At this moment, she was probably the same as He Yunxing. Xiao Ju didn't pay attention to her. The officers and soldiers in Liangzhou's yamen were all made from the same mold as Sun Ling. They were served good wine and good food every day, and they had already developed the habit of only eating and not doing anything. They could capture the weak old and weak women and children, but when they met someone who could fight, they were completely helpless. Fei Nu single-handedly beat them all to the ground. Seeing this, Sun Ling took a step back and ordered his servant, Go and call everyone here. The servant turned to run, but before he could take a step, he was hit by a stone. His legs went weak, and he knelt down. He Yen secretly threw away the stone in his hand. Of course, he couldn't let anyone report this. Although it wasn't that he couldn't defeat them, it was tiring to fight back and forth. Fei Nu also needed to rest. Suddenly, there was no one around him that he could use. Sun Ling was half angry and half afraid. He pointed at Xiao Ju and said, You dare to beat up officers and soldiers. Do you still have the law? Didn't you say that you are the law in Liangzhou? He Yen felt that he was acting like a dog threatening to bully others because of its master's power. He hid behind Xiao Ju and talked back to Sun Ling. Sir, your position as the law isn't that great. You can't even fight as well as other people's guards. Sun Ling pulled out the whip from his waist and was about to swing it at He Yan's face. He Yan shrank behind Xiao Ju. In the next moment, Fei Nu had already grabbed the whip and kicked it. Sun Ling tripped and fell to the ground. Fei Nu took the opportunity to step on his head and stomp his face into the ground. He Yan was speechless as he watched. This slave Fei didn't utter a single word. He was quite heartless. Young master, should we kill him? Fei Nu asked. You dare to kill me? My father is from Liangzhou's Ji County. Sun Ling was stepped on until he couldn't speak clearly. He was angry and afraid. But at this moment, he still didn't believe that this person would really kill him. He didn't forget to threaten, My father will not let you go. You will all die. You are still young. Don't curse others. Seeing that he had been restrained, He Yen walked forward and squatted next to Sun Ling. She tilted her head and looked at him. Besides, who doesn't die? Do you think you are a monster and will never die? Then I really admire you. Her tone was sincere and lecturing. It was even more infuriating and humiliating than Fei Nu, who had stepped on his face. Sun Ling was so angry that he couldn't speak. He Yen didn't sympathize with this person at all. In this world, she hated people who bullied the weak the most. Men who bullied women were even more detestable. If they had any conscience, they wouldn't do it. Only incompetent men would bully women. To be able to do this to a cute little girl, this person was a beast. She wanted to continue to anger Sun Ling. Suddenly, there was a commotion downstairs. It seemed that someone was leading a group of people upstairs. She had just stood up when someone rushed to the door and shouted, My son! He Yen followed the voice and saw a man rushing in front of Sun Ling. Fei Nu raised her foot. He held Sun Ling's head and said anxiously, My son! Are you hurt anywhere? It was a middle-aged man who looked very similar to Sun Ling. He also had the same black birthmark on his cheek as Sun Ling. But because he was older than Sun Ling, other than being ugly, he had a wretched and vulgar appearance. Coupled with his gorgeous clothes, he looked out of place. He Yen didn't think that she was a superficial person who judged people by their appearance. When she saw this person, she couldn't help but look away. Then she looked at Xiao Ju's face and Xiao Ju's waist. She suddenly felt much more comfortable. This was what it meant to be beautiful. Father, Sun Ling saw that the people supporting him had arrived. He pointed at He Yen and Xiao Ju and shouted, These two people pretended to be court officials. They kidnapped my concubine and injured my people. Father, arrest them. I want them to die without a burial place. How dare you? Hearing this, the person was furious. He pointed at He Yen and the others and said, Men, arrest them. So you're from Sunji County. He Yen smiled and said, Why waste time? Your people can't beat them. You're just a bunch of good-for-nothings. Probably not expecting to meet such stubborn people, Magistrate Sun was stunned. When he came back to his senses, he was even more furious and said, "Arrest them! Kill them!" Kill them? He Yen frowned. No wonder it was said that the father and son of the Sun family could do whatever they wanted in Liangzhou. Even the officials of the capital did not have this power, but they could do it. Sun Xiangfu. The person who interrupted him was Xiao Ju. He looked at the other party and said coldly. His voice was like a knife, sharp and piercing, "Open your eyes and see who I am." When he received the news and rushed over, Sun Xiangfu did not have time to hear what had happened. He only knew that Sun Ling had brought people to arrest them, who knew that they would be bullied instead. As a father, he supported his son. Moreover, this was Liangzhou. Sun Xiangfu did not think too much. When he arrived and saw how badly Sun Ling had been beaten up, Sun Xiangfu's heart ached. The light was dim, so he didn't take a good look at Xiao Ju's face. When he heard her words, he looked up seriously. With one look he was stunned. A moment later, Sun Xiangfu suddenly lifted the corner of his robe and knelt down. He pressed his head against the ground and said in a trembling voice, I didn't know that the governor was already here. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you." "Governor?" Sun Ling looked at his father in surprise. Seeing Sun Xiangfu come to his senses and look at his cowardly appearance, he knew that he would not be able to make any waves. He Yen smiled and said, "Magistrate Sun, what kind of crime do you want me to forgive? When little young master came upstairs, he wanted to kidnap my servant and take my life. He wanted to make my life worse than death in front of my uncle. He was very impressive. Now he wants us to forgive him? How would we dare? Isn't that right, uncle?" She looked at Xiao Ju and confidently complained. This time, other than Xiao Ju, his nephew, the young master of the right minister's residence, had also sent the invitation. At this moment, this young man was calling Xiao Ju uncle. It must be Qing Lisu. Sun Xiangfu did not expect that his unfilial son would offend his uncle and nephew. He felt bitter inside. He slapped Sun Ling's face, and Sun Ling's head was slapped to the side. This slap was very strong, and everyone could hear the crisp sound. Sun Xiangfu knelt down and kowtowed as he said, "This is all because I did not teach my son well. My son was blind and did not recognize you and little young master. I hope that you will forgive him. When I go back, I will teach my son well." Seeing that Xiao Ju still did not say anything, Sun Xiangfu gritted his teeth and slapped him again. Sun Ling was already injured, and his reaction was not as good as before. The slap just now had already stunned him. Now that he was unexpectedly slapped again, he immediately screamed. However, Sun Xiangfu would not stop. Since he wanted to show Xiao Ju, he could not be soft-hearted. He slapped him and scolded, "You unfilial son, you have forgotten all the etiquette and shame that I have taught you. How can you slander someone for no reason? I know that you admire Military Governor Xiao and think that someone is pretending to be the Military Governor Xiao, so you are so angry, but this is the real Military Governor Xiao. You have done a bad thing with good intentions." He Yen. She gasped in amazement as she listened. Look, officials really knew how to talk. In her previous life, even when she was a third-rank general, she did not have such a glib tongue. If she could have such a glib tongue, wouldn't she also be a first-rank official and be conferred a title of nobility? Sun Xiangfu slapped Sun Ling more than 10 times in a row. Sun Ling was beaten until he screamed again and again. When Sun Xiangfu saw this, his heart ached. Although he had many wives and concubines, he only had one son. Now that he was doing this for Xiao Ju, he hoped that Xiao Ju would give him a way out. However, this cold and emotionless commander-in-chief of the Right Corps only looked on coldly and did not say anything. If this continued, Sun Ling might be beaten to death. Sun Xiangfu had no choice. He let go of his hand and crawled to Xiao Ju. He kept kowtowing to Xiao Ju. "Commander-in-chief, he will die if you hit him again. I beg you to give my son a way out. Commander-in-chief, if you want to punish someone, punish me." For a moment, Sun Xiangfu kept kowtowing on the ground. Sun Ling was lying on the side, bleeding from the corner of his mouth. He looked quite pitiful. If he had not seen Sun Ling's character before, He Yen would have been touched by the father-son relationship. After all, the one who did the evil was the son. What did the father do wrong? However, Xiao Ju did not disappoint He Yan. Even when Sun Xiangfu's head was bleeding, Xiao Ju's expression did not change at all. When Sun Xiangfu felt that he could not hold on any longer, Xiao Ju spoke. He said, "It is the father's fault for not teaching his son well." Sun Xiangfu. He lowered his head and looked down at Sun Xiangfu. His voice was very calm. "Have you forgotten how Zhao Nuo died?" As soon as he said this, Sun Xiangfu's sobbing stopped abruptly. He felt a chill from head to toe. How did Zhao Nuo die? Zhao Nuo was pushed to the front of the monument and beheaded by this person in front of him. Who was Zhao Nuo? Zhao Nuo was the eldest son of the current Minister of Revenue. How could he forget this? When Zhao Nuo was in trouble, many officials and nobles came forward to plead for mercy because of Lord Zhao. The 16-year-old Xiao Ju did not even bat an eyelid and killed him. Even the emperor could not do anything about it. This person was going to be serious. He could even kill the son of the Minister of Revenue. Although Sun Xiangfu was a tyrant in Liangzhou, in the end he was just a small county magistrate. Sun Xiangfu was so scared that tears almost fell from his eyes. He trembled and said, "Commander-in-Chief, please spare my life. Please forgive me, Commander-in-Chief." Sun Ling did not know why his father was so afraid of Xiao Ju, but when he saw his father like this, he could not help but panic. The guests upstairs and downstairs were all shocked by this turn of events. They were very happy to see the county magistrate and his son, who had always done all kinds of evil in Liangzhou, in such a sorry state. After a long time, Xiao Ju turned around and said, "Get up." Sun Xiangfu was so weak that he almost fainted. He looked at Xiao Ju's back and said, "Commander-in-Chief, if there's a next time, I'll take his life," he said. Sun Xiangfu was overjoyed. He dragged Sun Ling and kowtowed to Xiao Ju, saying, "Commander-in-Chief is magnanimous and does not care about my son. Don't worry, if there's a next time, there's no need for you to do anything. I'll take his life myself." Xiao Ju turned around and walked into the room, saying, "Take your men and leave this place immediately." "Commander-in-Chief, are you not going to stay in your residence?" Sun Xiangfu asked carefully. "No need. I still have things to do in Liangzhou. When Yuan Baozhen arrives, I'll pay him a visit." Sun Xiangfu wanted to say something, but he restrained himself. Today's events were too sudden, and it was not a good place to talk. It was better to take Sun Ling back and find a doctor to check on him. He agreed to Xiao Ju's words and ordered his men to move. Sun Xiangfu moved very quickly. In less than half an hour, his men had all left. They even cleaned up the things that had been broken. The guests also left. The innkeeper did not expect such a big figure to be living in the inn. There was fear in his eyes. He Yan patted him on the shoulder and said, "It's okay. We're all very friendly. Don't be afraid. Your mung bean noodles are very delicious. I want to eat more tomorrow." The innkeeper saw that the young man was innocent and felt relieved. After the innkeeper left, He Yan breathed a sigh of relief. When he turned around and saw Xiao Ju's back, his heart was in his throat again. How should he explain this to this commander-in-chief? Xiao Ju did not go into his room. Instead, he went into He Yan's room. Fei Nu also followed. When He Yan walked in, he saw Tao Tao hiding in the corner. She was probably frightened. When Xiao Ju came in, she hid in the corner with her head lowered. He Yan walked over and patted her back gently. He comforted her and said, "They're gone. It's okay now." Xiao Ju and Fei Nu could not help but look at him when they heard his gentle words. He Yan saw this and said, "Uncle, you're not going to tell me," he stared at He Yan and said coldly, "that your fiancé came to Liangzhou to find you?" Fiancé? He Yan thought for a moment before remembering that she seemed to have made up the excuse of being a fiancé in order to prevent the female doctor, Shenmu Xue, from discovering her identity as a woman. She didn't expect Xiao Ju to still remember. "Don't say that, uncle," He Yan said seriously. "I was in Liangzhou City and saw Sun Ling snatching a woman and forcing her to become a prostitute. I couldn't stand it and helped. Who knew that Sun Ling was so lawless in Liangzhou that he chased me all the way to the inn?" She smiled flatteringly. "I was also promoting your good reputation of getting rid of evil for the people." Xiao Ju sneered, "I don't need that kind of thing." He Yen did not know how to respond. She thought for a while and decided to change her words. I was really scared to death. Fortunately, uncle, you came in time. If not, I don't know how badly I would have been bullied by Sun Ling. I might not even be able to see you in the future. You are my nephew. Xiao Ju heard this and said leisurely, who dares to bully you? It was a nice thing to say, but why did it sound so wrong? He Yen thought, forget it. She already called him uncle. In any case, he had already taken advantage of her. He did not care about how much he took. It was just a verbal advantage. He would not lose anything. Then, uncle, let's send this girl back home. If she stays in Liangzhou, that bastard Sun Ling will definitely take revenge. He Yen tried to ask for his opinion. You deal with it yourself. How heartless, He Yen thought in his heart. At this time, the servant who had been silent all this time suddenly raised her head and looked at Xiao Ju, saying, Second young master Xiao? Although her voice was hesitant, it was not soft. It was especially clear in the quiet night. Xiao Ju looked at her and saw that the servant was a young man with slightly dark skin. His eyes were red and swollen, but his voice was feminine and timid. She could not help but frown. Seeing her frown, the servant was even more afraid and blurted out, I am Song Tao Tao. So her surname was not Tao, but Song. Hien thought, why did the name Song Tao Tao sound so familiar? Where did he hear it before? Song Tao Tao took the initiative to call Xiao Ju. Could it be that the two knew each other? Hien thought and asked. She said, You know him? Song Tao Tao looked at Hien with a complicated expression and said, Second young master Xiao is the person who is going to be engaged to me. Hien said, What? Uncle. Song Tao Tao finished her sentence. Hien breathed a sigh of relief. She knew it. She had never heard of Xiao Ju's engagement. How could someone suddenly appear to be engaged? It turned out to be her uncle? It turned out to be her uncle? She suddenly came back to her senses and looked at Xiao Ju, asking, That, Commander-in-Chief, how many nephews do you have? Xiao Ju looked at her as if she was looking at an idiot. Hien immediately understood. This was Cheng Lisu's fiancée. Cheng Lisu came to Liangzhou from the Shuo capital to escape the marriage. What a coincidence, his fiancée had the same idea. Who knew that she would be kidnapped to Liangzhou and saved by him? What kind of heaven-sent fate was this? They were probably destined to be together. No wonder when Sun Ling came and Hien introduced himself as Cheng Lisu, Song Tao Tao was so shocked that her boots fell off. It turned out that she was frightened by the news of her fiancé. Second young master Xiao. Song Tao Tao looked very conflicted. I don't want to go back to the Shuo capital for now. I heard that you are stationed at the Liangzhou garrison. Can I go with you to the garrison? I promise I won't cause you any trouble. Are you sure you want to go to the Liangzhou garrison? Second young master Zhao's expression was cold. Your fiancé is here right now. Song Tao Tao's expression stiffened. Hien felt that she was about to cry. Miss Song, don't you like young Master Cheng? Hien said in a small voice. I think he's quite good. Cheng Lisu was a good person, other than being a little stupid. Sometimes he was a little naive, but he had a good heart. His appearance could be considered handsome and cute. His family background didn't need to be mentioned. No matter what, he shouldn't be disliked to this extent. He doesn't know anything. When the little girl mentioned Cheng Lisu, her eyes were full of disdain. He's not good at literature or martial arts, and he's not motivated. I don't like him. He's not even as good as you. Hien was flattered. She had only known Song Tao Tao for half a day, but she had already received such a high evaluation. She was flattered. Xiao Ju glanced at her and said to Song Tao Tao, We'll talk about this later. You should rest today. I'll call a doctor tomorrow. Song Tao Tao nodded. Hien yawned and felt a little sleepy. Because Song Tao Tao was a girl, the shopkeeper found another room for Song Tao Tao, which was right next to Hien and the others. Fei Nu lived with Hien. She slept on the small couch on the side and gave the bed to Hien. Hien was very grateful and even felt a little guilty. However, this guilt was quickly washed away by other things. Saving Song Tao Tao tonight was really a coincidence. Even she herself didn't expect that the little girl she saved was Cheng Lisu's fiancée. These two people really had the temperament of a child. They ran away from the marriage without saying a word. They even ran to Liangzhou, which was thousands of miles away. Fortunately, He Yan ran into them today. Otherwise, she really didn't know what to do in the future. Sun Xiangfu seemed to be very afraid of Xiaoju. Xiaoju's attitude was so arrogant that it made people's hair stand on end. He Yan felt that even when she was at the peak of her military exploits and had the highest status, she wouldn't speak to her colleagues or subordinates like this. In the end, this was the difference between people. No wonder Cheng Lisu was raised to be a good-for-nothing son, who didn't know anything and was always so self-righteous. With such a powerful uncle, he could do whatever he wanted in Dawei. Why would he need to be good at both civil and martial arts? Tonight, she just casually complained and was able to make the county magistrate and his son, who were so powerful in Liangzhou, kowtow and apologize. This kind of feeling of being protected was quite refreshing. It also felt good. Now that He Yan thought about it, he felt quite envious of Cheng Lisu. Song Taotao couldn't be left alone in Liangzhou. She probably couldn't lack people by her side. Who knew if the son, father and son would wait for an opportunity to take revenge? The best way was to send her back to her parents in Shuojing. Of course, it would be best if she could be protected by the Song family. But now that Song Taotao had run to Liangzhou to escape the marriage, she might not obediently return to Shuojing. Moreover, it wasn't easy to find someone to send her back. In order to protect Song Taotao's safety, he could only temporarily keep her in the Liangzhou guard. He wondered what kind of expression Cheng Lisu would have when he saw Song Taotao. The two of them wouldn't fight, right? Even if they did, it didn't matter. In any case, there was a ready-made practice field. He Yan didn't even know what he was thinking. Those thoughts gathered together to form a question. That was, who exactly was Song Taotao? Why was this name so familiar? There were many times when he almost thought of it, but he couldn't remember it. Fei Nu was a martial artist. He didn't make a single sound when he slept and was very quiet. He Yan had long been used to the thunderous snoring of the Liangzhou guard. For a moment, he couldn't fall asleep and turned over. Who knew that she would join the army and become a nephew? It really was inconceivable. Join the army, join the army. In the darkness, He Yan suddenly sat up. She remembered who Song Taotao was. In reality, back then, He Yan had quarreled with He Yuansheng for the first time and then joined the Fuyue army under the cover of night because of this Miss Song. Chapter 92. He Yan entered the Virtuous Prosperity Hall at the age of 14 and joined the Fuyue army at the age of 15. She joined the army in a hurry and no one knew about it. The Sherbao in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall were all shocked. Later, when she returned to the capital, she had already received meritorious service and was conferred an imperial title. Thus, the He family did not pursue the matter as to why she joined the army. Now that she thought about it, if she did not receive any meritorious service at the time and was just an ordinary soldier, she might not have ended up like this after a few years of wandering from place to place before returning to the He family. He Yan still remembered Song Taotao. At the age of 15, He Yan used the identity of He Rufei to study in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall. Her aptitude was mediocre and she was a girl. She was naturally not as strong as men. She really could not be compared to the youths in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall. He Yuansheng gradually saw this, but he did not blame her. He Yan also thought that she could continue to live peacefully like this. Until that day. There were 2 days every month in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall when the students could go home. But because of the rainy season, the rainwater washed down the signboard at the entrance of the Virtuous Prosperity Hall. The Sherbao let the students go home 1 day in advance and come back 3 days later. He Yan went back in a hurry and no one knew. She first changed her clothes and then went to find He Yuansheng. Every month when she returned to the He family, He Yuansheng would ask her about how she was doing in the Virtuous Prosperity Hall. This kind of distant and almost monitoring question did not make He Yan feel warm. Every time she spoke to He Yuansheng, she was actually a bit nervous. But that day, when she went, He Yuansheng had not returned. Even the manservant was not at the door. She first sat in He Yuansheng's study and waited. There was a screen in the study. He Yan felt that since she had nothing to do, she might as well sit behind the screen and read a book for a while. She had not sat for a moment when someone came in. The one who spoke was He Yuanyang's voice. He said, "He Yan's matter, what do you think?" He Yan, who was about to go out, heard this and was momentarily stunned. She wanted to go around the screen, but then she stopped. She did not go out. Instead, she shrank her body back. He Yuanliang and He Yuansheng had different temperaments. He Yuansheng looked gentle, but he was actually very strict. Later on, Madame He gave birth to other children and treated them very harshly. He Yuanliang, her biological father, had a completely different personality. He was always smiling. He also pampered and spoiled his children, except for her. He Yan's feelings towards He Yuanliang were very complicated. If one were to say that she revered He Yuansheng, her adoptive father, and her eldest uncle, then towards He Yuanliang, there was a trace of imperceptible dependence and expectation. She had hoped that He Yuanliang would treat her as kindly and affectionately as he treated his younger sisters, but He Yuanliang did not. Every time he looked at her, it was as if he was looking at his nephew. He was polite and at most lecturing her a little. In this way, after being disappointed many times, He Yan didn't force it. But today, he heard his name from his biological father's mouth. He Yan didn't know why he hid here and didn't go out. She's doing very well now. She's studying in the Xianchang dojo and no one has found out. She's 15 now. At most, before she's 18, she has to settle her marriage. He Yan, who was hiding behind the screen, held her breath for a moment. Marriage? She had never thought about this. She was now using the identity of He Rufei, a man. How could she get married? Once she got married, what would He Rufei do? Who would be this He Rufei? She thought it was natural. She was a woman, so she naturally had to get married to a man. After all, she didn't have the time to polish herself. However, He Yuanyang's following words shocked her. "Eldest brother, have you seen a suitable young lady in the capital?" "Young lady? How could it be a young lady?" He Yan raised her head. The two people on the other side of the screen had their backs to her. She couldn't see their expressions clearly, but from their tone, she could tell that they were calm and didn't feel that their words were shocking at all. The vice director of internal servants, Song Ci, has 2 daughters. The eldest daughter is already married, and the younger daughter is 11 years old now. He Yuansheng said, "She's a bit young, but when He Yan turns 18, she'll be of marriageable age. After she reaches marriageable age, she can wait 2 years before getting married." Song Ci's daughter? He Yuanliang hesitated. Is it that little girl called Song Taotao? I remember that Song Ci searched through all the merchants in Shuojing to find a birthday gift for her daughter 2 years ago. That's right. He Yuansheng stroked his beard and smiled. Song Ci's Fu doesn't have any young boys, only 2 daughters. Now that the eldest daughter is married, she's especially doting on the younger daughter. If we can get married to the Song family, we'll have the Song family's help. Why should we worry that our Fu won't prosper? He Yuanliang heard this and relaxed his expression, only saying, "Eldest brother's words are reasonable. Why don't I host a banquet in a few days to invite Song Ci to the Fu? We can talk about the children. At the very least, we have to let him know that we have this idea." The two of them spoke happily and harmoniously, as if this marriage was just a transaction. This wasn't a big deal. Nowadays, in the noble's Fu, women were mostly used as a bargaining chip. But using her as a bargaining chip was one thing, but how could they not take her identity into consideration? She was a woman. How could a woman marry another woman? If they really did get married, wouldn't they be harming the girl's life? He Yan thought this in his heart. Suddenly, he bumped into the screen and made a sound. He Yuansheng turned his head and shouted, "Who is it?" He Yan saw that he had been discovered and simply stood up, saying, "It's me." Yan? He Yuansheng let out a sigh of relief and then frowned, saying, "Why are you here? Shouldn't you be at the Xianchang dojo today?" "Shirbao told us to leave school a day early, so I came here to find father." He Yan said this and paused, secretly glancing at He Yuanliang. He Yuanliang revealed his usual smile, his expression not changing at all because he called He Yuansheng father. It was just another disappointment. Why would he not give up? He Yan lowered his head, hiding the disappointment in his eyes. "I have matters to discuss with your second uncle right now. Come find me later. He Yuanxing said, Go see your mother first. He Yan did not move. Yan? He Yuanxing's brows furrowed again. I already heard what father and second uncle said just now. He Yan raised his head, his voice calm. Father, I am a woman, how can I marry the second miss of the Song family? Not expecting that He Yan would speak like this, the two brothers of the He family stilled. This is not something you should care about. A moment later, He Yuanxing responded, I will arrange everything for you. I will not marry the second miss of the Song family. As a woman, it is enough to sacrifice me. There is no need to involve unrelated people, He Yan said. She was already 15 years old now, a bit taller than before, and dressed as a youth. Her eyes were clear and magnanimous. Standing here, she was tall and straight like a poplar tree, like a stranger. He Yuanxing angrily said, What do you mean? Are you resentful of us? Are you blaming us for sacrificing your right to be a woman? He Yuanliang looked at her with a smile. Yan, how can you speak to Big Brother like this? Big Brother is doing this for your own good. He Yan thought, was this really for her own good? When she was studying in the Xian Chang dojo, the teacher had taught her, a heart of compassion is the end of benevolence, a heart of shame is the end of righteousness, a heart of refusal is the end of propriety, a heart of right and wrong is the end of wisdom. But what the He family wanted her to do now was to be heartless, unrighteous, impolite, and unwise. How preposterous was this? He Yan was not afraid, loudly replying, I will never agree to be engaged to the second miss of the Song family. Not only that, I will not marry any woman in this life and delay the lives of others. He Yuanxing and He Yuanliang were both dumbfounded. The He family knew what kind of temper He Yan had. She was gentle and easy to talk to, even a little timid and weak. In the He family, she would do whatever she was told to do and didn't like to cause trouble. If it wasn't for the accidental exchange of identities, she would be the same as all the other ordinary young ladies in Shuojing, taciturn, obedient, and living her life like a puppet. But what was she like now? He Yan, you dare to speak to me like this? He Yuanxing was really angry. When he was angry, his facial features were very fierce, and the children of the He family's first branch were very afraid of him. He Yan looked at him, unmoved. Father sent me to study in the Xian Chang dojo to learn etiquette and to know virtue, not to be a liar for profit. The young man raised his head, proud, clear, and clean. Probably the disdain in her eyes stung He Yuanxing, and He Yuanxing flew into a rage out of humiliation. He Yan fiercely slapped He Yan's face. That was the first time He Yan was hit by He Yuanxing. And her biological father just watched from the side, not saying anything. From the beginning to the end, the only sentence he said was, Big Brother is doing this for your own good. The quarrel between He Yuanxing and He Yan this time alarmed the entire He family. And He Yuanxing was the most powerful person in the He family, so no one doubted his decision. He Yan was locked up in the ancestral hall for a day and a night, and was only released on the second night. During this day and night, no one came to visit her. Whether it was her adoptive parents, or her biological parents. During this day and night, He Yan looked at the big and small memorial tablets in the ancestral hall, and only thought of one question in her heart. What kind of family was the He family? Did she really want to stay in the He family? If the meaning of her existence in this family was to be a substitute, to tie up the interests that didn't belong to them, without any sincerity, then there was really no place for her to stay here. A puppet also wanted to break free from the strings and control her own life. The second night, she returned to her room, and the room was cold and cheerless. He Yan remembered that these days, the Fuyue army was recruiting soldiers on the streets. She sat on the couch, thinking that if someone came to see her tonight and asked her if she was okay, she wouldn't leave. But there was no one. The sound of the night watch came from afar. He Yan carried her bag on her back, and sneaked out the door under the cover of the night. For so many years, ever since she started practicing martial arts, she had been like this, and was already familiar with the way. It was also because the He family didn't value her that she was so relaxed when she left. Forget it, she thought. Although she couldn't continue to stay in the He family, she still saved a little girl from Shuojing. If she wasn't here, how could the He family arrange a marriage? That girl called Song Tao Tao, when she became of marriageable age in the future, she would be able to spend the rest of her life with a suitable young man, and not be implicated in this shameful scheme and become a pawn to be sacrificed. The night was dark, she couldn't see the end of it. The young girl disguised as a young man didn't know what the road ahead was. She turned back to look at the He family's door. The courtyard was hidden in the night and connected with the past. She steeled her heart, turned around, and walked straight ahead, never looking back. The past laid out in front of her eyes, as if the dust covering it was blown away. It gradually became clear as if it had just happened yesterday. Only He Yen knew that it was a past life that she couldn't go back to. At that time, she was young and impetuous, angry at the absurdity of the He Yuanxing brothers' decision, and didn't seriously think about it. She was a woman. If she really married the Song second miss, sooner or later, this secret would be exposed. How could the He family allow this to happen? Unless they already knew that this kind of thing would never happen. He Yen stared at the scented sachet hanging on the bed curtain. He Yuanxing and He Yuanliang knew a long time ago that sooner or later He Rufei would return. He Yen didn't know He Rufei's situation, but presumably, He Yuanxing already knew at that time. He Rufei's body was gradually getting better and wasn't on the verge of death like they said. It was because they knew He Rufei would return sooner or later. He Yen and He Rufei would return to their original positions. That was why they talked about the engagement without any scruples. They must have already made up their minds. Before He Rufei got married, He Yen would take off the man's clothes and return to being the He family's young miss. At that time, He Yen didn't realize this. She thought that she would be He Rufei for a long time, perhaps sacrificing her entire life. She didn't expect that one day, she would return to being herself. But this wasn't a blessing. After being someone's substitute for a long time, it was inevitable that she would forget who she was. Moreover, that day, she left the He family with a bag and joined the Fuyue army. From that day on, she had already disrupted the He family's plans, and the chess game was already out of control. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that after living for a lifetime, dying once, and waking up again after going around in circles, she would actually meet the girl who was almost engaged to her in her previous life here. The 11-year-old girl had already grown into a graceful lady. The young man who left home with a bag had already tasted all the flavors of the world. Fate was mysterious. If it wasn't for Song Tao Tao, she wouldn't have left home, she wouldn't have joined the army, and she wouldn't have become General Fei Hong He Yen today. In the darkness, He Yen smiled silently. Fate let them meet here. Maybe it was to tell her one thing. She didn't do anything wrong. She saved a girl. The next morning, when He Yen woke up, Fei Nu was no longer in the room. Last night, she thought about things until late into the night, so she fell into a deep sleep. She didn't even know when Fei Nu left. When she woke up, she went to freshen up before leaving the room. She wanted to knock on the door next door to see if Xiao Ju was there. However, as soon as she knocked, the door next door opened, and Song Tao Tao's head popped out from behind the door. She said, "Are you looking for second young Master Xiao? They're having breakfast downstairs." They didn't even call her for breakfast? He Yen thought to himself, they really didn't treat her as one of their own. He Yen asked, "Have you eaten? Let's go downstairs and eat together." Song Tao Tao nodded. The young girl went downstairs with her, and sure enough, she saw Xiao Ju and Fei Nu sitting by the window downstairs. There were some small dishes on the table. He Yen didn't know if it was because he was shocked by Xiao Ju's identity last night, but the innkeeper made the breakfast especially exquisite. He Yen wanted to scold the innkeeper for being extravagant. "Uncle, why didn't you call me for breakfast?" He Yen muttered. "It's fine if you didn't call me, but why didn't you call Miss Song?" "I wanted to sleep more. It has nothing to do with second young Master Xiao," Song Tao Tao hurriedly said. He didn't know why, but she seemed to be a little afraid of Xiao Ju. However, when he thought about it, Xiao Ju was always sarcastic. How could a delicate young girl like her stand it? He Yen picked up a single basket golden cake and stuffed it into his mouth. The cake was fragrant and sweet. It was fresh out of the steamer, so it was piping hot and very appetizing. She smiled and said, "Uncle, what are we doing today?" Xiao Ju looked at her with a faint smile. "What do you want to do?" Before He Yen could finish her words, Song Tao Tao interrupted her. Young Master Cheng. She already knew that He Yen wasn't Cheng Li Su, but she could also see that He Yen was pretending to be Cheng Li Su, so she didn't expose him. She called out Cheng Li Su's name and said, "Can you go out with me?" After she said this, the other 3 people at the table looked at Song Taotao. "I don't have any clothes. I'm really not used to wearing men's clothes. I want to go out and buy some ready-made clothes to change into, but I don't remember the way. Young Master Cheng, can you go out with me to buy something?" She gathered her courage and finished in one breath. Of the 3 people at the table, Fei Nu didn't say a word the entire night, and Xiao Ju didn't look like the kind of person who would accompany a young lady to buy things. Only He Yen was kind and gentle. He Yen said, "Of course. It's just that." She looked at Xiao Ju. "Uncle, do we have anything to do today?" "Nothing." Xiao Ju lowered his eyes and said lightly, "You can go with second Miss Song." "Thank you, second young Master Xiao." Song Taotao was overjoyed. After dinner, He Yen went out with Song Tao. After the 2 of them left, Fei Nu said, "Young Master, I'll go and follow them now. Don't get too close." Xiao Ju ordered. He still has Song Taotao with him. Fei Nu complied and was about to leave when he suddenly thought of something. He hesitated and said, "Young Master, are we just going to let Sun Ling's matter go?" Xiao Ju curled his lips. "Let's wait a little longer. It's not the right time yet." He Yen followed Song Taotao out of the inn. After leaving second young Master Xiao, Song Taotao became more cheerful. She leaned closer to He Yen and whispered, "Why did you call second young Master Xiao, uncle? Why did you call yourself Cheng Li Su?" "It's a long story. Young Master Cheng has something to do and can't come to Liangzhou for the time being, so I came in his place. Don't tell anyone else about this." Song Tao said, "Of course I won't tell anyone. That good-for-nothing must have asked you to come in his place because he can't do it himself, right? This kind of person wants to be my husband? Why doesn't he just dream about it?" Second Miss Song's prejudice against Cheng Li Su was indeed very deep. "Then what's your name?" Song Taotao asked. "I can't tell you now, in case I accidentally spill the beans. I'll tell you when I'm done with my business in the city." He Yen smiled. Song Taotao pursed her lips, not very happy. He Yen pointed at a clothing store. "Look, there are clothes over there. Do you want to go in and pick some?" Song Taotao changed her mind. He Yen sighed in relief. However, before he could relax for long, he suddenly thought of something and cursed inwardly. When He Yen came out of the Liangzhou guard, Cheng Li Su gave her clothes, hairpins, and jewelry, but forgot to give her money. He Yen didn't dare to ask Xiao Ju for money, so she only had the silver ingot from the flag contest. She couldn't bear to use it. She would rather pull the buttons on Cheng Li Su's clothes in exchange for tea than use it. Song Taotao had just come out of the Wanhua Pavilion, so her traveling expenses had already been plundered clean. How could she have any money left? She was afraid that whatever she bought today, He Yen would have to pay for it. This was all she had now. Fortunately, Liangzhou City wasn't the capital. There weren't tailors that could sell clothes for tens or hundreds of taels of silver. The clothes here were considered cheap, so He Yen could afford them. Song Taotao picked a piece of clothing as well as a pair of shoes, a hairpin, and a pair of earrings. He Yen had no choice but to pay, so he only had a single copper coin left to pay. After Song Taotao picked out the clothes, she changed inside before coming out. The moment he came out, the originally delicate young master turned into a delicate little girl in an instant. She picked out a cherry red dress and tied her long hair into 2 flat buns with a cherry red hairband. She had bright eyes and white teeth, looking extremely cute. He Yan's eyes lit up when he saw her. In an instant, the heartache of spending money disappeared in front of the cute little girl. "It's really beautiful," she praised sincerely. Song Taotao's face turned red. She turned her head and muttered, "The clothes here are too shabby. There aren't any good clothes. Even the clothes made by the Song Estate's tailors are much nicer than this." He Yen thought to himself, how could this be called shabby? She had already spent half a year's worth of savings on this. Song Taotao wrapped up the original clothes in a cloth bag and walked out of the clothing store. "Let's go shopping somewhere else." He Yen replied. A little girl's beauty and cuteness also cost money, especially a little girl who grew up in a wealthy family. Yan only hoped that there wouldn't be anything else in Liangzhou that would attract second Miss Song's attention. She already had no money. God seemed to have heard her thoughts. Song Tao didn't want to buy anything else along the way. However, she was still in high spirits when she strolled around Liangzhou city. Yan kept her company with all his heart and didn't seem bored at all. In the end, this arrogant little girl felt a little embarrassed. She asked Yan, "You've been walking with me for so long? Was it boring?" "No," Yan said with a smile, "I just wanted to walk around." Song Tao looked at him for a while and said, "You're really a good person." Yan was a little surprised. When she said that, the little girl had already continued walking. He thought for a while and shook his head with a smile. Yan didn't just feel like taking care of Song Tao. He also felt like he was doting on her like an elder. After all, this little girl almost became his fiancée. He was also the person who she didn't hesitate to run away from home to fulfill. In a way, he changed her fate. In the years after that, Song Tao didn't get involved in those strange things and grew up well. Yan felt very lucky. If she didn't do that back then, perhaps Song Tao wouldn't have married another woman, but the person who got married would have been He Rufei. Was marrying into the He family really a good thing? There was no warmth in this family, only benefits. It really wasn't suitable for a little girl like Song Tao. However, Yan felt a little helpless as he looked at the little girl's bouncing figure. When she left home, it could be considered as running away from marriage. Now, Cheng Lisu was also running away from marriage. Song Tao was also running away from marriage. Was this the same as running away from marriage? She had to have a good talk with Cheng Lisu. The Sun residence in Liangzhou city was in a miserable state. Sun Ling was sent back to the Sun residence last night. Sun Xiangfu invited famous doctors to treat Sun Ling's injuries overnight. Although they were all superficial injuries, they weren't light. He had to recuperate for a few months. Since young, when had young master's son suffered such a big loss? Sun Xiangfu was also in a bad mood. Early this morning he punished several servants for their mistakes. The servants didn't dare to make a single mistake. The residence was quiet. Sun Ling was lying on the bed. Mrs. Sun sat by the bed and wiped her tears. She scolded fiercely, "Your father is too much. He's just a general. How could he beat you up like this? My son has suffered. I don't know how long it will take for him to recover." Sun Xiangfu heard this as soon as he came in. He said angrily, "What a woman! What do you mean by just a general? Do you know that he even dared to kill the eldest son of the Minister of Revenue? The Minister of Revenue even reported it to the Emperor. What happened in the end? In the end, he could only admit that he was unlucky. If he had killed this unfilial son last night, what do you think you could have done? You couldn't have done anything." Mrs. Sun was stunned by the scolding. After a while, she said in a panic, He's really that powerful? Then what should we do now? Should we apologize to him?" "You can leave." Sun Xiangfu was annoyed. He waved his hand. "I will arrange this. I came to ask Ling a few things." Mrs. Sun left with tears in her eyes. Sun Xiangfu walked to Sun Ling's side. Looking at Sun Ling's pale face, he was distressed and angry. He said, "Of all the people you could provoke, you had to provoke that king of hell." "I didn't provoke him. It was his nephew who went too far." When Sun Ling mentioned this, he was angry. He told him everything that happened last night. In the end, he said, "How did I know that Cheng Lisu would suddenly attack? Was that servant girl the one you liked?" Sun Xiangfu asked. Sun Ling shook his head. "I don't know. Before I could see her face clearly, that person surnamed Shao arrived. If it was just a misunderstanding, it would be fine. If it was really this girl, since Cheng Lisu protected him, it was inevitable that he would be prejudiced against you." Sun Xiangfu sighed. "It's my fault. I didn't tell you that Xiao Ju was coming to the city. Otherwise, things wouldn't have turned out this way." Sun Ling never cared about politics. He only knew how to eat, drink, and gamble. Therefore, he didn't know that Sun Xiangfu had sent an invitation to Xiao Ju. "Father, we have already offended them. They won't make trouble for us in the future, right? Sun Ling was a little anxious. He was used to being lawless in Liangzhou City. He only relied on his father, the county magistrate. But last night, when Sun Xiangfu cried in front of Xiaoju, Sun Ling understood that Xiaoju was not someone the Sun family could afford to offend. Don't be afraid, Sun Xiangfu said. In a few days, Censor Yuan will arrive. Censor Yuan is Prime Minister Su's man. Prime Minister Su and Xiaoju have always been at odds. Perhaps we can do something about it. Chapter 93. He Yan accompanied Song Taotao until evening before heading back to the inn. There was a stall selling tonghalu along the way. The tonghalu on the straw figurine looked sweet. He Yan took out the last few copper coins he had and bought a few skewers. He took the biggest one and gave it to Song Taotao. Are you hungry? Eat some of this to fill your stomach. When we get back to the inn, we'll eat something good. God had mercy on her. Along the way, she had been thinking about what to do if Song Taotao wanted to eat at a restaurant and she didn't have enough money. Fortunately, she ate too much in the morning and the little girl was picky, so she didn't want to eat anything along the way. She just sat down and drank a few cups of tea, ate 2 pieces of cake, and spent a few copper coins. Song Taotao took the tonghalu and looked at He Yan. Thank you for your hard work today. She paused and said, actually, there isn't much to see in Liangzhou City. The things are ordinary. If it wasn't to hide from second young Master Xiao, I wouldn't have let you accompany me until so late. He Yan also took a stick of candied haws and put one in his mouth. The hawthorn was sour and astringent, and the honey was sweet and sour together, making him salivate. He Yan lamented that he hadn't eaten such childish things in a long time. He asked, what's wrong? Don't you like Military Governor Xiao? It's not that I don't like him, it's just, I'm a little scared. The little girl pursed her lips. It seems that in front of him, everyone will feel inferior. He Yan was amused. Inferior? Song Taotao was like this because she was too young. He Yan smiled. But he's handsome and powerful. Don't all little girls like him? When he was young, there were many girls who secretly came to see Xiaoju. He Yan had never seen a girl who didn't like him. Song Taotao's behavior was already very special. I'm different from them. Song Taotao snorted. They only know how to look at appearances. But such a cold person who doesn't know how to speak sweet words will make their lives miserable. I don't like this kind of man. I like a gentle man. She sighed and said regretfully, young Master Xiao is very good like that. It's a pity that he already has a wife. He Yan almost choked on the hawthorn in his mouth. What? Xiaoju wanted to be his niece-in-law's uncle, but he didn't know that she wanted to be his sister-in-law. Song Taotao was indeed someone who had almost become her little fiancé. She actually had such a different view of people. He Yan said, actually, Military Governor Xiao is quite gentle sometimes, but it's rare to see someone like you who doesn't like him. Her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to get something out of Song Taotao, so she asked, do you know General Fei Hong, who is now as famous as him? Have you seen him before? General Fei Hong? Song Taotao said, are you talking about He family's eldest young master? The one who said that he couldn't see anyone because of the injury on his face and that he wore a mask all day long? He Yan, it's rare for him to wear a mask every day for 10 years. I saw him before I ran away from the marriage. At that time, he had already taken off his mask. He looked all right. Do you know why he wore a mask? Song Taot. He Yan, why? Naturally, it was to find a gimmick for himself. Think about it. He didn't take off his mask earlier or later. He took it off right before His Majesty conferred him the title. He said that he had the help of a godly doctor to heal the scar on his face, but how could there be a godly doctor who couldn't even see the scar? After so many years, everyone knew that He family's eldest young master was ugly and terrifying. When he suddenly took off his mask, he turned out to be an elegant young master. This was so bizarre. So, his original 5 points of appearance became 7 points. He Yan couldn't help but applaud Song Taotao in his heart. What she said made sense. If she wasn't the one who wore the mask, he would almost believe that Song Taotao was telling the truth. Then what do you think of General Fei Hong compared to Military Governor Xiao? Song Taotao answered without thinking, of course it's second young master Xiao. That He family's eldest young master isn't as good-looking as second young master Xiao. Fine, in this world, people still judged people by their appearance. He Yen said in surprise, I've never seen General Fei Hong before. I have the same surname as him. I've always wanted to see him with my own eyes. I wonder if I have the chance in this lifetime? Of course you have the chance. However, He family's eldest young master is now very valued by His Majesty. Before I left the capital, His Majesty often summoned him to the palace. Previously, when his cousin passed away, He family's eldest young master didn't attend court for a few days. His Majesty even gave him a lot of things. He Yan's smile was a bit forced. Are you talking about Su family's eldest young mistress? Did she marry someone with the surname Su? I'm not too sure either. I don't know what her name is. This older sister wasn't in the capital before. There were very few people in the capital who knew her, and she didn't have any close sisters. I only know that she was General Fei Hong's younger sister. After being married for a year, she contracted a strange disease and became blind. After she became blind, she wandered around the manor by herself. The servants didn't notice and she fell into the pond and drowned. Song Tao sighed, how pitiful. She clearly had General Fei Hong as her backing. How could she have lived a bad life? I can only say that she had a hard life. What was her name again? He something? I really don't remember. He Yen thought to himself, she was called He Yen. Unfortunately, this name was destined to be buried under General Fei Hong's name. The only people who knew of her was the young mistress of the He family, General Fei Hong's younger sister, who was born with a weak body and was sent to a farmstead to be raised. No one remembered her name. Then what about eldest young Master Su? He Yen asked. After Su family's eldest young mistress died, what happened to him? I usually don't like to hear about these things when I'm in the manor. I vaguely remember my sisters mentioning that Missy's husband was very depressed for a period of time after the death of the young mistress of the He family. The truth was that he was deeply in love. But this kind of thing, who knows? Song Taotao had a kind of insight that surpassed her age in this kind of matter. She said, when can a man's words be taken seriously? Who knows, he might still be reminiscing today and welcoming a new person into the manor tomorrow. He Yen smiled bitterly, what you said makes a lot of sense. Why are you suddenly asking me these things? Song Taotao said, but I really don't know much. If you really want to know, you should ask second young Master Xiao. They are both military generals and colleagues. They should know more than me. He Yen thought, wasn't that because she was afraid that Xiao Ju would suspect her? Right now, she already didn't regard her as one of their own. If she continued to ask about the He family, Xiao Ju would probably dig up everything about her. If her identity as a woman was exposed before she even found out anything, she wouldn't even be able to stay in the military camp. Then, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. As they spoke, they had already reached the entrance of the inn. He Yen and Song Taotao went upstairs. Song Tao said, thank you so much for today. I will go in and change my clothes and rest for a while. Later, accompany me to eat something. He Yen smiled and said, okay. Although this young lady had the habits of a young mistress and liked to order people around, he didn't dislike her. After she left, He Yen didn't return to his room. Instead, he knocked on the door next door. Today was very good. Someone in the room answered, come in. As soon as He Yen entered, he saw Xiao Ju sitting at the table. She was using a white handkerchief to wipe the guqin in front of her. He Yen took a closer look and saw that it was the guqin that she had crushed. Commander-in-Chief, is the guqin fixed? It's not broken, right? He Yen leaned over and asked in a low voice. Xiao Ju lazily said, what's the matter? She completely didn't want to talk to him. He Yen took out his hands from behind his back and said, look, I brought you a gift today. Although I accompanied Miss Song to buy things, I still miss you in my heart. This tonghulu is for you. Xiao Ju glanced at the tonghulu in her hands and said, take it away. She was so unreasonable. He Yen said, don't. I have already tasted it. It's very sweet. I don't eat sweets. He said indifferently. He Yen looked at him and cursed in his heart. What was he pretending for? When they were together at the Xianchang restaurant, this person carried a small sachet with him. At that time, the young man who was close to him tried to snatch it, and he protected it tightly. He Yen thought that it was some kind of treasure. In the end, he found out that it was just a bag of osmanthus candy. He went home 2 days a month. When he came back to the Xianchang restaurant again, the sachet was full again. A person who always carried osmanthus candy with him when he was young was now telling her that he didn't eat sweets. Did this person dislike the fact that it was bought with 2 copper coins? If you don't eat it, you can give it to Fei Nu. He Yen put the tonghalu into the pen holder on the table. He changed the topic and his expression softened. He smiled and said flatteringly, "Governor, I still have something to discuss with you." Xiao Ju looked at him with a calm gaze. He Yen continued to say shamelessly, "I accompanied Miss Song out today. Miss Song wanted to buy clothes and jewelry. She has already spent all the money she got from fighting for the flag. I thought that since Miss Song is your niece-in-law, she is your relative. Although I shouldn't spend the money to buy things for your relative, I am sincere to the governor. How can I let the governor spend money? It's just that I don't have any money now. If Miss Song wants to buy something, can you give me some money? If I don't have money to buy things, I don't want to embarrass you, right? Uncle? Uncle?" The young man's smile was particularly flattering. His eyes flashed with intelligence, like a fox cub that he had hunted when he was young. He could bite people, but when he asked for food, he pretended to be obedient and docile. Xiao Ju looked at him coldly, unmoved. He Yen asked, "Can you do it?" The man's reply was very heartless, "No." "Really?" She was still unwilling to give up. He Yen straightened up and stared at him with hatred. In her previous life, when she joined the army, she had heard people say that a person's true growth began from borrowing money. He Yen now understood. She was already so humble. Xiao Ju was so rich, but he didn't give her any money. He was deliberately targeting her. Xiao Ju raised his head with a calm expression and mocked. "I still remember that I'm not your uncle. Did you forget that Song Taotao is Cheng Li Su's fiancé, not yours?" He Yen thought for a while before she understood. She said, "You don't think that I and Miss Song..." Xiao Ju lowered his eyes and continued to wipe the zither. "I hope you still remember who you are." He Yen almost cursed out loud in his heart. Look at what he was saying. Was this something a human would say? Was Xiao Ju afraid that she would steal Cheng Li Su's fiancé? What a joke! If she hadn't taken the initiative to leave home, how could Cheng Li Su have this fiancé? Also, Xiao Ju wanted to be her uncle. Did he know that she wanted to be his sister-in-law? She didn't want to be his wife, so what did he know? He Yen was angry in her heart. She put on a fake smile and said, "Of course I remember who I am. I'm He Yen who won first place in the Liangzhou Guard competition." She emphasized the word first place and said, "If the commander-in-chief doesn't want to give me money, then forget it." She turned to leave, but suddenly remembered something. She turned around and grabbed the tonghalu on the table. "Since the commander-in-chief doesn't like to eat sweets, I'll take this tonghalu and eat it myself." She took a big bite as if she was venting her anger. As she walked out, she mumbled, "What kind of commander-in-chief is he? He's just a stingy miser." Xiao Ju, Fei Nu, who was outside, happened to hear this when he came in. He looked at He Yan's back and closed the door in confusion. Xiao Ju looked up at him. "Young master, it's nothing." Xiao Ju interrupted him. "Did you get anything today?" Fei Nu shook his head. "He Yan has been accompanying Miss Song. He didn't do anything today. He just strolled around the streets and drank tea. He didn't meet anyone." Xiao Ju nodded. "I know. Is it possible that the person he met wasn't from Liangzhou?" Fei Nu asked. "I feel that He Yan is a bit strange. Not to mention his extraordinary skills, he was a new recruit, but he knew how to set up a race. However, he didn't get caught. It could be seen that his attitude towards Xiao Ju was extremely bold. Ordinary people wouldn't be like this, right? He's by my side. I won't make any mistakes. Tell Chi Wu to come here and pick him up." "Young master, do you want Chi Wu to accompany Miss Song?" Fei Nu asked. Xiao Ju nodded. "Yuan Baozhen is about to arrive in Liangzhou. It's not suitable for Song Taotao to travel with him. There are no good meetings and no good feasts, he said calmly. We have to be fully prepared. Fei Nu replied, I understand. The next few days were very comfortable. Song Taotao's hand hadn't fully recovered from the first day of strolling around. She was too lazy to go out these days. Xiao Ju and Fei Nu were often absent during the day. He Yan didn't want to leave Song Taotao alone at the inn, so he could only accompany her. The little girl was easy to coax. He casually told her about the strange people and strange things he met in the army. She listened very seriously. When she was tired of listening, she casually ate downstairs at the inn. The day passed quickly. Yan herself really wanted to go out with Xiao Ju and the others and ask around for some information, but they didn't bring her along at all. It was obvious that they wanted to exclude her. After a few times, Yan was also a person who knew her own limits and was too lazy to go forward. This trip to Liangzhou wasn't worth it. His only hope was that Imperial Censor Yuan Baozhen. Yan had never looked forward to someone's arrival so much. Fortunately, after 3 days, Imperial Censor Yuan finally arrived in Liangzhou City. This morning, Fei Nu brought someone over. This young man was also dressed like a guard. His name was Qi Wu, and he should be Xiao Ju's confidant. He came over to take Song Taotao away. You can't stay here for the time being. Qi Wu will send you to a safe place. I'll come to pick you up after the matter in Liangzhou is settled, Xiao Ju said. Song Tao looked at Yan, then, young Master Qing won't come with me? The others immediately looked at Yan, especially Xiao Ju. Her eyes were extremely cold. Yan instantly understood the meaning of, you have to deal with your own problems. She could only stand up and smile at Song Taotao. I have to do something with second young Master Xiao, so I can't accompany you for now. Don't worry this. Qi Wu will protect you. What is it? Is it dangerous? Song Taotao asked again. Yan was embarrassed, but also touched. He didn't dote on this child for nothing. She even knew to ask if it was dangerous. She smiled. With second young Master Xiao around, it's not dangerous. Don't worry. Then you must be careful. Song Taotao warned her, then walked away, looking back every few steps. Yan turned around and was met with Xiao Ju's mocking gaze. She said, I really didn't do anything. Xiao Ju turned around and left. Yan hurriedly chased after her. Uncle, don't be angry. Although Miss Song only asked if it was safe for me and not you, it wasn't because she thought you were cold and unapproachable. I'm kind, gentle, and likable. Please don't take it to heart. Shut up. Xiao Ju stopped and looked at her from head to toe. He sneered, if you have time to talk nonsense, why don't you think about how to not be exposed at the banquet? Cheng Li Su is still the young master of the UC Naolang's residence. And you, he looked at her meaningfully, can you act like it? After saying this, he left without looking back. Yan was stunned for a moment before she realized that this person was mocking her again. She shouted at Xiao Ju's back, what's wrong with the UC Naolang? In the end, she was also the young master of the He family, who wasn't an official. She had pretended to be the young master of a rich family for so many years. What couldn't she pretend to be? Tonight, she must make Xiao Ju look at her in a different light. At the Liangzhou city gate, a carriage stood out among the crowd. This carriage was very luxuriously decorated. Even the outside was embroidered with a large mountain and river painting. There was also a white crane in the grass. The white crane's eyes were made of black crystal. It was very exquisite and interesting. Someone lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked outside. After a while, the curtain was put back down. Yuan Baozhen covered his nose with a handkerchief and said, the wind in this Liangzhou city is really strong. It's much worse than the capital. He was now in his 40s. In fact, he was about the same age as Sun Xiangfu. Compared to Sun Xiangfu, he took good care of himself. His clothes were neat and tidy. His face was white and beardless. When he spoke, there was a hint of a smile. He looked very amiable. Say, Xiao Ju coming to this place, isn't he asking for trouble? He asked the person next to him. Next to him sat a person who looked like a guard. His appearance was mediocre and his body was thin. If it wasn't for the thick calluses between his thumb and index finger, others would think that he was just an ordinary servant. I don't know, the guard replied. Forget it. Since I'm going to see him today, I'll ask him myself. Yuan Baozhen smiled. Hey, is the Sun family coming? Sun Xiangfu had personally come to welcome him. A satisfied smile appeared on Yuan Baozhen's face. Not bad, not bad. Magistrate's son is very polite. Sun Xiangfu looked at the carriage that had stopped and wiped the sweat off his forehead. Originally, when the imperial censor came to Liangzhou, although he couldn't neglect him, he didn't need to welcome him at the city gates. However, he had already offended Xiaoju. If he offended Yuan Baozhen as well, he wouldn't have any chance of survival. He still hoped that Yuan Baozhen would back him up and make Xiaoju suffer a little. Naturally, he had to use all his efforts to please the person in front of him. When Yuan Baozhen got off the carriage, Sun Xiangfu went up to him and cupped his hands. Lord Yuan, please forgive me for not going out to welcome you. Don't mention it. Yuan Baozhen smiled amiably. I feel that Lord Sun is very friendly. Lord Sun, you don't have to be so polite. The two of them chatted for a while before Sun Xiangfu said, if that's the case, please come to my residence to rest. Yuan Baozhen had come to Liangzhou to temporarily stay at the Sun estate. The two of them then boarded the carriage that Sun Xiangfu had prepared. Inside the carriage, Yuan Baozhen asked, I heard that the Right Army's commander-in-chief has arrived in Liangzhou. Is he in your residence right now? Military Governor Xiao is temporarily staying at an inn in Liangzhou City. He said that he has important matters to attend to. He just arrived tonight. Speaking of which, this official has something that I need Lord Yuan's help with. Yuan Baozhen's eyes flickered, but his smile remained the same as before. He only asked, Magistrate's son, what is troubling you? It's the matter of Military Governor Xiao. My unfilial son accidentally offended Military Governor Zhao's nephew. I'm afraid that Military Governor Xiao will resent me because of this. Since I've prepared a banquet to welcome Lord Yuan, I hope that Lord Yuan can mediate and resolve this misunderstanding. Sun Xiangfu's face was full of shame. Although he didn't say what the matter was, Yuan Baozhen could guess. The son of a county magistrate who could cover the sky with one hand in Liangzhou was naturally not a good person. That Xiaoju's nephew was the young master of the Right Army's Minister Nailing. If the two clashed, the young master's son was destined to suffer. He thought this in his heart, but said, I think that magistrate's son is overthinking this matter. That military governor Xiao isn't an unreasonable person. Since it was an accident, it's fine to clear things up. Why would he still hold a grudge? That's true, Sun Xiangfu wiped his sweat and smiled apologetically, but military governor Xiao, didn't he deal with Zhao Nua the same way back then? As soon as he said this, Yuan Baozhen's expression changed. Everyone in Dawei knew that Xiaoju had beheaded the eldest son of the Minister of Revenue, Zhao Nua, at the Monument Hall. However, too much time had passed, and other people thought that he was young and impetuous, so they gradually forgot. Now that Sun Xiangfu mentioned it, Yuan Baozhen remembered it again. When Zhao Nua was in trouble, the first person that Minister Zhao went to was actually Prime Minister Su. Prime Minister Su handed over the invitation, and Minister Zhao went to the throne room and cried in front of the emperor. The emperor was very sympathetic, but did not punish Xiaoju. If the wood is not cut from its roots, it will come back to life. If the water is not cut from its source, it will come back to flow. If the disaster is not cut from its roots, it will come back to chaos. At the time, Prime Minister Su only said this one sentence, if I don't get rid of this person, he will become a big problem for me in the future. They all wanted to take advantage of the fact that Xiaoju was still young and hadn't grown up yet to quickly get rid of him. However, ever since he led the Southern Mansion soldiers to the southern barbarian lands, he never left anyone with this opportunity. His speed of growth was astonishing. In just a few years, the person who killed Zhao Nua, whom everyone thought was unreasonable, was doing the same thing now. Others would think it was normal. This was the result of Xiaoju's efforts in these few years. He was much more powerful than Xiao Zhongwu and much younger. Darren Yuan? Seeing Yuan Baozhen's strange expression and silence, Sun Xiangfu did not understand and asked anxiously. It's nothing, I just thought of something else. Yuan Baozhen smiled. Since Military Governor Xiao has come to the banquet tonight, I will speak to him for you. However, I don't know the temperament of Military Governor Xiao. If he does not listen to me, don't blame him. No, Sun Xiangfu was moved to tears. I am already very happy that Darren Yuan is willing to speak. Yuan Baozhen smiled and shook his head. His thoughts had already flown to other places. No matter how powerful Xiao Ju was, he came to Liangzhou this time to get rid of this big problem for Prime Minister Su. He hoped that everything would go well. In the evening, He Yan was going to go out with Xiao Ju. They were going to Sun Xiangfu's residence, so they had to send Song Taotao away. Otherwise, if Sun Ling saw Song Taotao, or if Song Taotao saw Sun Ling, something might go wrong. Because they were going to the banquet, He Yan deliberately changed into a very Qing Li Su robe. It was a honey-colored robe with a red carp embroidered on the corner. Cheng Li Su looked cute and innocent in this robe, but He Yan looked different in it. He looked brighter and more open, but he was still a handsome young man. She picked a hairpin of the same color and stuck it in her hair. She did not forget to pick up the folding fan and held it in front of her chest. When she looked at the person in the bronze mirror, she was very satisfied. After tidying up, He Yan stepped out of the door. As soon as he stepped out, he saw Xiao Ju standing at the door. He had also changed into a different robe. It was a dark blue robe with 2 cranes. He did not wear a golden crown today, only a red sandalwood hairpin was inserted. It looked simple, but if one looked carefully, the material and embroidery were of high quality. He was born exceptionally handsome, and with such attire, he lost some of his aloofness and gained a trace of elegance. He was indeed a noble and elegant young master. He Yan thought that the bright and beautiful young man had finally grown into such a handsome young man. He did not seem to have changed, but at the same time, he seemed to be completely different from before. Xiao Ju turned sideways and met He Yan's slightly dazed gaze. He smiled and said, "Wipe your saliva clean." He Yan subconsciously wiped his saliva. He immediately came back to his senses and said, "When? You look like a fool." His words were full of disdain. "You still want to hide it from Yuan Baozhen?" As soon as He Yan heard this, she was not convinced. With a schwa sound, she opened up her folding fan and walked to Xiao Ju's side. She smiled faintly and said in a low voice, "With my appearance, if I was in Shuo capital, even if I don't dare to be a governor, I would at least be on par with Qing Gongzi. Otherwise, why would Miss Song only tell me before she left and not you?" The young man's eyes were full of smiles. His eyes were as bright as the stars, but he could not stop his foolishness. Xiao Ju mocked, "Because you are stupid." "What? Stupid people always need a lot of reminders." He Yan frowned. "Uncle, do you hate me? This person, would he die if he did not mock him for a day? You are my nephew. Why would I hate you?" Xiao Ju glanced at him with a smile and ordered Fei Nu, "Let's go." He Yan had seen the residences of the officials in the capital, but they were just SOSO. Although the He family couldn't be compared to the Xiao family, they were still considered officials in the capital. The Sun estate was actually comparable to the He families. However, this wasn't the capital but Liangzhou. Sun Xiangfu wasn't an official in the capital, he was just a county magistrate. 3 years of being a county magistrate, 100,000 snowflakes of silver. These words weren't false. He Yan looked at the mountain rocks, bonsai, and glazed jade tiles. He couldn't help but be amazed. How could a county magistrate afford these things with his salary? Who knew how much money Sun Xiangfu had taken from the people? Also, looking at Sun Ling's conduct, the Sun family's father and son had done a lot of evil in Liangzhou. They were practically half a local tyrant. She thought to herself, but she didn't know that her appearance was also seen by the person beside her. Xiao Ju's eyes moved slightly. The young man was wearing Qing Li Su's clothes, but he wasn't as innocent as Qing Li Su. Although it was said that people rely on clothes and horses rely on saddles, a low-level recruit pretending to be the young master of a large family would definitely give himself away. Things done, people seen, would be engraved into a person's body, becoming clear traces. Everyone's traces were different. He Yan's eyes were filled with emotion and contemplation, but there was no fear or nervousness. If this was his first time doing something like this and going to a place like this kind of reaction wouldn't be justified. At this time, Inyu stopped and said, "Master, Military Governor Xiao and young Master Cheng have arrived." Immediately, Sun Xiangfu's exaggerated voice sounded from inside, "Military Governor Xiao has arrived." This official was afraid that they wouldn't come. "It's good that they're here, it's good that they're here." He Yan looked up. This person's appearance was filled with fear and trepidation. He didn't have the awe-inspiring aura he had when they first met at the inn a few days ago. Being an official like this, he wasn't afraid of being laughed at. Sun Xiangfu didn't wait for Xiao Ju to speak and turned around to reveal the person behind him. He smiled and said, "Lord Yuan has also arrived." This was Yuan Baozhen? He Yan looked at him. He saw a middle-aged man with a white face and no beard smiling amiably at them. In an instant, this person overlapped with the person in He Yan's memory. The first time she saw Yuan Baozhen, it was outside the He family's study. At that time, He Rufei had already gone to receive his meritorious service, taken off his mask, and truly became General Fei Hong. And she, as the young miss of the He family's second branch, was waiting for the day she would marry into the Su family. When she saw this person, she was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect He Rufei to make friends in the imperial court so quickly. Later, when she asked He Rufei who that person was, He Rufei said that it was the current imperial censor, Yuan Baozhen. "You're with him, what are you doing?" He Yan had only asked casually at the time. He Rufei looked at her and smiled strangely. He said, "What you need to do now is embroider your wedding dress and not care about these things." He Yan moved closer, his tone was unfathomable. "You have to remember, you are now the young miss of the He family's second branch, a woman." He Yan didn't think much of it. She didn't know how to embroider, and she wasn't the one embroidering the wedding dress. But she understood the meaning of He Rufei's words. He Rufei was warning her not to have any contact with General Fei Hong. Was he afraid that the truth would be discovered? He Yan sneered in her heart. It was ridiculous that she didn't notice the murderous intent in He Rufei's words at that time. Now that she suddenly met her cousin's friend, how should she get the information she wanted? Before He Yan could think clearly, Yuan Baozhen had already stepped forward. He first cupped his hands in greeting to Xiao Ju. "Governor." Then he looked at He Yan. "This is Qing Gongzi, right?" He Yan stared at him and revealed a surprised smile. "Lord Yuan. I've long heard that Qing Gongzi is young and valiant, with an extraordinary appearance. Now that I've met you, it is indeed true." Yuan Baozhen smiled. "Heroes indeed come from the young." He Yan, wasn't Cheng Li Su the famous good-for-nothing Gongzi in the capital? Fortunately, this person continued to speak. He understood that if he wanted to become an official in Dawei, the first thing he had to do was to learn the ability to speak human language when meeting people and speak ghost when meeting ghosts. He Yan could only say, "You flatter me, you flatter me. This one is ashamed." As the two of them chatted politely, Sun Xiangfu rubbed his hands and said uneasily, "Governor, this official has a presumptuous request." "Xiao Ju, what is it?" "Didn't my son offend Governor and Qing Gongzi some time ago?" Sun Xiangfu appeared to be very uneasy. Although this official has taught him a lesson, this child feels very guilty and wants to personally apologize to Governor and Qing Gongzi. This official thinks that since he knows that he was wrong, this official will thicken his old face and beg Governor to give this unfilial son a chance to apologize. "Everyone makes mistakes," Yuan Baozhen chimed in from the side. He smiled and said, "Moreover, this is only a misunderstanding. As long as the misunderstanding is resolved, the governor will not take it to heart. Quickly call Sun Xiaoye over and clarify things with Military Governor Xiao." "Really?" Sun Xiangfu excitedly ordered the servant, "Quickly call Sun Xiaoye over." He Yan saw that the two of them were singing the same tune and did not even ask for Xiao Ju's opinion before finishing the show. He knew that the two of them must have discussed this beforehand. This Yuan Baozhen seemed to be the same type of person as Sun Xiangfu. How could someone who could be so close to He Rufei be a kind person? Sun Ling seemed to have been waiting outside the hall. Not long after he finished speaking, he came in with the servant. As soon as he came in, he knelt down in front of Xiao Ju. Yan almost bit his own tongue. This person used to be arrogant and insufferably arrogant. Now, in just a few days, he looked much more haggard, as if he was seriously ill. He was dressed very simply. He bowed to Xiao Ju and said weakly, "Previously, I was insensible and had an argument with Qing Gongzi. Now, I know that I was wrong. I hope that Governor and Qing Gongzi can forgive me for being young and frivolous. I will definitely turn over a new leaf and never do it again." Was this how young and frivolous was used? Looking at his appearance, he was not young anymore. Yan did not believe that this person would be able to not do it again in just a few days. She looked at Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju's expression was indifferent. She did not say yes or no. The atmosphere froze for a moment. Yan still had to mediate. In any case, it was an opera. If they did not continue, wouldn't the banquet be awkward? She smiled and looked at the top of Sun Ling's head. "What are you saying? That day was just a misunderstanding. Young Master Sun, you don't have to take it to heart. Just don't recognize the wrong person in the future. It's fine that you met me and Uncle this time. If you met someone who acted arbitrarily, even if you apologized 100 times, nothing would happen." As soon as he spoke, Sun Xiangfu breathed a sigh of relief. He quickly scolded Sun Ling, "Why aren't you thanking Qing Gongzi? Qing Gongzi is younger than you and much more promising than you." He probably had nothing else to praise, so he said dryly, "Learn more from Qing Gongzi in the future." Sun Ling quickly said a bunch of good things to Yan. Yan almost vomited her dinner from last night. She really did not like hearing these words. How could this fake be used to scare people? After finishing this act of, "The county magistrate's young master brings a bramble to ask for punishment," Sun Ling went back to his room. According to his father, Sun Ling was punished when he came home last time. He fell seriously ill and could not get out of bed. Today, he forced himself to come to Xiao Ju to ask for punishment. Now that he had done so, he had to go back to bed. Yan smiled and said, "Young Master Sun, go quickly. Don't hurt yourself." He was afraid that something bad would happen at the banquet. After all, his son looked like a troublemaker. After Sun Ling left, Sun Xiangfu said, "Military Governor Xiao, please take a seat." "Young Master Qing, please take a seat. When the sky turns dark, there will be singing and dancing in the residence. At that time, we can enter the banquet and enjoy the dance." Yan sat down next to Xiao Ju. After that, it was Sun Xiangfu who did all the talking. There was nothing special about the conversation. It was nothing more than asking Yan and Xiao Ju if they were used to living in Liangzhou City. The weather in Liangzhou City recently. In the end, it was just some meaningless small talk. Yan's thoughts were always on Yuan Baozhen. Yuan Baozhen and He Rufei could be considered friends, right? At least, she had seen Yuan Baozhen enter and leave the He residence more than once. Moreover, he did not seem to be acquaintances with He Yuanxing and his son. Then, did He Rufei know that Yuan Baozhen was coming to Liangzhou City this time? He must have known. If they were good friends, perhaps they would bid each other farewell before leaving. Then, Yuan Baozhen should know about the He residence's situation and He Rufei's plans for the next few days. However, how could Yuan Baozhen say so much to her, Qing Lisu? Yan was lost in her thoughts and forgot to hide her gaze. Yuan Baozhen was not an ordinary person. He glanced around and noticed that Yan had been staring at him. He did not say anything and continued to listen to Sun Xiangfu's conversation with a smile. Occasionally, he would say a few words. At first glance, he looked very normal. After a while, the sky was completely dark. Sun Xiangfu stood up and said with a smile, "I think it's about time. Let's go to the main hall to enjoy the banquet." Of course, there was no objection. Sun Xiangfu walked in the front and led the way. Yan and Xiao Ju followed behind. Yuan Baozhen was on her right. Yan thought about He Rufei and could not help but look at Yuan Baozhen. Just as she was thinking about this, Yuan Baozhen suddenly turned his head around. He was an official and was very shrewd. At this moment, he was no longer smiling. His pair of eyes flashed with a frightening light. It was really frightening. He actually caught He Yen red-handed. He Yen was shocked. She had been discovered. Before she could say anything, she felt her arm being gently pulled. The next moment, a person stood in front of her. Xiao Ju's cold voice fell into her ears. "Watch where you're going." She looked over in surprise. Xiao Ju was taller than her, so Yuan Baozhen's horrifying gaze was completely blocked by him, and he couldn't see anything at all. Xiao Ju also looked at Yuan Baozhen and smiled. "Lord Yuan, why do you keep staring at my nephew?" Yuan Baozhen was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Nothing. You probably saw wrong." He turned around and no longer looked at He Yen. It was as if what had just happened was just an insignificant joke. Xiao Ju continued to walk forward. He Yen was stunned for a moment before following her. However, she felt a little strange. Although the words, "my nephew," were referring to Cheng Lisu, he was protecting her. She had not felt this kind of protection in a long time. Perhaps she had never felt it before. When they arrived at the main hall, the banquet had already been set up. There were long and short tables in all four directions. He Yen sat down next to Xiao Ju. The empty space in the middle of the main hall was probably for the upcoming singing and dancing. He Yen did not understand. Why would such a banquet invite beautiful women to sing and dance in the middle to liven things up? It should be known that a true master would not bother with such things. However, Sun Xiangfu was not a true master. When he looked at the dishes on the table, He Yen could not help but be speechless. There were auspicious dragons flying in pairs, Buddha's hand golden rolls, phoenix-tailed shark's fin, dried sea cucumber. The banquets held in the residence of a third-rank official in the capital were just like this. It seemed that the Sun family was living a very comfortable life. She turned her head to look at Xiao Ju again. It had to be said that Xiao Ju usually had a cold expression on her face. She could not do this or that. However, when she sat at the banquet and lazily sat down, she lost some of her indifference. The leisurely nature in her bones was all outlined. He Yen suddenly remembered that this person was originally the real young master of the capital. When he was young, he was also like this. Today he went to the banquet, tomorrow he would have a good night banquet. The young master's style was perfect. Thus, when he was at the banquet, he immediately had the shadow of the young master of the Xiao family. "Why are you looking at me?" Young Master Zhao's lips curled up. His voice was low and fell into He Yan's ears. "Be careful not to expose yourself." He Yen coughed lightly. "I was shocked by Uncle's grace and was distracted for a moment." She was used to flattering. Xiao Ju was too lazy to pay attention to her when she opened her mouth to speak inexplicable words. At this time, Yuan Baozhen opened his mouth. He said, "The relationship between Military Governor Xiao and young Master Cheng is very good. He's one of us." "Of course it's good." Xiao Ju replied indifferently. Yuan Baozhen originally wanted to find a topic to talk about. Of course, he did not care about Xiao Ju's attitude. He picked up the wine cup on the table and smiled. "I don't understand. Liangzhou is a bitter and cold place. Military Governor Xiao is much better in the capital than here. Why is he stationed in Liangzhou?" When He Yen heard this, her heart moved. She was also curious about this question. Xiao Ju was now the commander-in-chief of the Right Army. The entire Nanfu army was under his control. There was no need for him to bring a new soldier here. He Yen originally thought that he was demoted. However, looking at his arrogant appearance in front of Sun Xiangfu, it did not seem like he was demoted. Xiao Ju looked at Yuan Baozhen. He did not answer his question. Instead, he smiled and asked, "What does Imperial Censor Yuan think I am?" Why did this person kick the ball back to him again? Yuan Baozhen was also a smart person. The smile on his face did not change. He immediately used the ability that everyone in the bureaucracy had. He said, "I think that the commander-in-chief must be worried that the new soldiers will be difficult to lead. Other generals may not be able to lead them well. The commander-in-chief has never been afraid of hardships. That's why he volunteered to be stationed in Liangzhou." After a while, Xiao Ju said, "Is that so?" He asked casually, "Does Imperial Censor mean that I am here in Liangzhou is a good thing?" "Of course." Xiao Ju glanced at him and smiled indifferently. I thought that was not what Imperial Censor Yuan wanted to say. Oh. Yuan Baozhen smiled and asked, what does Military Governor Xiao mean by this? Small things are bound to fall. Big things are bound to fail. He said meaningfully. Could it be that Imperial Censor Yuan did not personally come to Liangzhou because of this? The atmosphere immediately froze. Sun Xiangfu did not dare to say a word. He kept his tail between his legs. Yuan Baozhen almost could not maintain his smile. He Yen turned to look at Xiaoju. He could not help but praise Xiaoju in his heart. You compliment me and I compliment you. This kind of talk was really meaningless. It was all a lie. Nothing useful would come out of a banquet at the end. Look at how powerful second young Master Xiao was. One sentence was enough to make others speechless. The hidden secrets of this banquet should have been laid out on the table a long time ago. Yuan Baozhen paused for a moment, then smiled. Military Governor Xiao really knows how to joke. I came to Liangzhou only because I was ordered to patrol. Xiaoju did not comment. How is the training of the new soldiers at the Commander-in-Chief's Guard? Yuan Baozhen asked again. Are there good soldiers and strong formations? Xiaoju looked at him with a half-smile. This is also one of the tasks of Imperial Censor Yuan's patrol? Although Yuan Baozhen had heard of Xiaoju's reputation in the past and had met him face to face, this was the first time they sat down and talked. Thus, for the first time, he truly experienced the arrogance of this young killing general. No wonder when he killed Zhao Nua, no matter what he said, it was useless. Just sitting down and talking with this young master was enough to make him physically and mentally exhausted. He could not maintain his usual smile for the first time. He only said, I'm just concerned. I'm afraid Imperial Censor Yuan is not only concerned about the new soldiers of Liangzhou, Xiaoju said slowly. The South Mansion soldiers and the 9 Flags Battalion. Why don't you show some concern as well? Yuan Baozhen could not respond. Sun Xiangfu looked left and right. Both of them were people he couldn't afford to offend, but he couldn't let a perfectly good banquet be filled with the glint of blades and shadows of swords. So, he nervously came out to mediate. I say, the two of you must be tired of talking. Why don't you stop and enjoy the song and dance? Eat something. This wine is from Grape Spring, newly brewed. Please have a taste. He then ordered the servant beside him, quickly calling you over. Not long after, several beautiful girls stepped into the hall. The one leading them was the servant who had led He Yen and the others into the hall. At this time, she had changed her clothes. Her red dress was embroidered with plum blossoms, and her sleeves were long. Her makeup was done again. Just now, she was just a delicate beauty, but now, she looked at Xiaoju with a dazzling radiance. Just like before, she was still looking at Xiaoju with deep affection. There were so many people sitting here. He Yen aside, Yuan Baozhen was an official. Why was this girl staring at Xiaoju alone? Wasn't her target too obvious? He Yen thought to himself. He looked at Xiaoju and saw that her eyes were as cold as ice. She was not moved at all. He Yen felt that the way he looked at Fei Nu was gentler than the way he looked at this girl. Was there something wrong with Xiaoju? For example, did she hate women? While she was thinking this, Yingyu had already led the other servant girls to bow and said, We servants have embarrassed ourselves. The girl playing the zither was playing Longing for a Long Lovesickness. The lingering melody, coupled with the beautiful girl, was a beautiful picture. He Yen was a girl. Xiaoju was not interested in singing and dancing. After being scolded by Xiaoju, Yuan Baozhen's mind had already flown to other places. The person he was most satisfied with was probably Sun Xiangfu himself. Sun Xiangfu himself was probably very fond of this dancer, but this Miss Yingyu might also be someone who judged people by their appearance. Her long sleeves were always swayed in the direction of Xiaoju. Her coquettish eyes could melt a person's bones, but they were always aimed at second young Master Xiao. He Yen was bored to death. He even counted that Yingyu had thrown 5 coquettish eyes at Sun Xiangfu, 3 at Yuan Baozhen, 17 at Xiaoju, and none at him. She was actually at the bottom. What right did she have to look down on others? Coming to a banquet was just coming to a banquet. Why did she have to attack people's confidence like this? He Yen thought to himself. Maybe it wasn't her fault. Who told her to wear the wrong clothes today? This color was too dark. She reached out with her chopsticks and picked up a piece of dessert. This was Sun Xiangfu's family banquet. Sun Xiangfu probably did not have the guts to poison the food. He Yan tasted it and found that it tasted pretty good. After one song, Ying Yu's forehead was covered in sparkling sweat. The sweat of a beauty was even more moving. Her face was red as she bowed to everyone. Good, good, good. Only Sun Xiangfu was watching the dance seriously. He clapped his hands and said, "Wonderful, wonderful. What do you all think?" Xiao Ju naturally did not answer him. Yuan Baozhen also just smiled. He Yan said, "It's really difficult to chase after a group of flowers. Heavenly fragrance and beauty of the country. Little young master also thinks it's good?" Sun Xiangfu looked as if he had found a confidant. He said, "Then how about giving Ying Yu to young Master Cheng? That would work?" He Yan's body stiffened. He waved his hand and said, "No, no, I already have a fiancé. I'm afraid it's not appropriate." Sun Xiangfu immediately felt regretful. He said, "That's a pity. Nowadays, when officials attend banquets, it was fashionable to give beauties to the other party at any time. Was there something wrong with his head?" He Yan was still in disbelief when he heard Sun Xiangfu say with a smile, "Ying Yu, then you should go and serve military governor Xiao." He Yan was speechless. She suspected that Wanhua Pavilion was opened by County Magistrate Sunday. Otherwise, why would his tone and demeanor be so similar to that of a brothel keeper? Even if he was a brothel keeper, he should still have a discerning eye. How could an ordinary person not see that Xiao Ju's entire body was filled with rejection? Some people were blind, but their hearts were as clear as a mirror. Some people were still able to see, but they were already blind. Fortunately, Miss Ying Yu knew her limits. She did not do anything stupid like touching Xiao Ju's hand. She only stood beside him and served him food. There was also a maidservant beside He Yan, who was serving her food. She raised her head and saw Yuan Baozhen sitting opposite her. The person serving the food behind him was not a maidservant, but a person who looked like an imperial bodyguard. Strange, could it be that he was the one who hated women? He Yan looked at the imperial bodyguard behind him. Originally, he was bored to death, but at first glance, he felt as if his blood was about to freeze. His entire body froze on the spot. The imperial bodyguard was not very tall. In fact, among the imperial bodyguards, he could be considered thin and short. His facial features were also extremely mediocre. When he hid behind Yuan Baozhen, he was almost hidden in the darkness, making it difficult for people to notice him. He had been silent all this time. He Yan did not notice him from the moment she saw Yuan Baozhen. Now that she saw him, she felt as if she was struck by lightning. In the blink of an eye, all the dishes on the table disappeared, and the scenery flashed back to that day. She was sitting in the Su residence. Her personal servant served her a bowl of medicinal soup. She said that the kitchen specially brewed this soup for her to nourish her body. She only hoped that she could become pregnant with Lin as soon as possible and add a son to the Su family. The scenery was just right. The sun was shining brightly. She sat at the table and looked out of the window. She saw a manservant pass by. The servant smiled and explained that the medicinal ingredients used to brew the soup today were sent by this manservant. This was He Rufei's manservant, a member of the He family. He Yan was newly married at that time. Although he was occasionally disappointed because of Su Zhiheng, he did not take it to heart. He still had a trace of warmth towards the He family. She would never have thought that the medicinal ingredients sent to nourish her body were for her eyes. That was the last time she saw sunlight in her previous life. The next day, she had a high fever that did not recede. After that, she went blind. It was only a very short glance, but she had already memorized this person's face. Now, even if he changed into an imperial bodyguard's uniform and followed beside Yuan Baozhen, she could still recognize him at a glance. "Let's drink together." Sun Xiangfu raised his cup and smiled. The sparkling wine was poured into the white jade cup. She saw the man beside her raise the cup to his lips. In an instant, the past flashed before her eyes. He Yan was extremely frightened. He only felt that the previous scene was about to repeat itself. Shocked and angry, he slapped away the wine cup in Xiao Ju's hand. Don't drink. Chapter 95. Don't drink. Her voice was like a sharp sword, filled with bloodlust, interrupting the joyous atmosphere of the banquet. The unforeseen event happened at this moment. Yu, who was standing beside Xiao Ju, was holding a jug of wine in her hands. She had poured wine into the jug and did not have time to take it back. He Yan's voice fell, as if she had received some kind of signal. A dagger appeared under the jug of wine and without hesitation stabbed towards Xiao Ju. The young man's expression was calm and did not show any signs of panic. The jade cup in his hand flew out and collided with the dagger in the air, shattering into pieces and stopping the tip of the dagger. In a split second, the wind blew from all directions. The beautiful women who had just finished dancing did not all retreat. They stood to the left and right and immediately rushed towards Xiao Ju. This was a carefully planned assassination. Uncle! He Yan called out. The young man slammed the table and a long sword appeared in his hand. He was surrounded by more than 10 people and coldly ordered, "Hide further away." Sun Xiangfu was stunned by the sudden turn of events. He was so scared that he covered his head and hid under the table. He did not forget to shout, Someone come quickly." He Yan was paying attention to the bodyguard behind Yuan Baozhen. She had thought that since this person was He Rufei's man, there must be a reason for him to follow behind Yuan Baozhen. However, in her anger, she only cared about the wine on the table and did not think that the women around her were assassins. Yuan Baozhen was protected by the bodyguard behind him and retreated a few steps. He looked panicked. The bodyguard did not make a move. Could it be that today's assassins were just a coincidence? He Yan thought in her heart. She looked at Xiao Ju, who was surrounded and almost exploded in anger. The assassins were all women. Whether it was the women who had just danced or the women who had played the zither, each of them had light bodies. They looked gentle and soft, but their attacks were vicious. Hidden in their sleeves were hidden arrows. With a wave of their sleeves, the hidden weapons flew towards Xiao Ju. In such a big banquet, Xiao Ju was the only one who could fight against 10 people. No matter if it was He Yan's previous life on the battlefield or this life in the martial arts practice field, he had always been open and aboveboard. When had he ever seen such underhanded methods? For a moment, he was filled with righteous indignation. Seeing the small knife used to cut the roasted venison on the table, he grabbed it and rushed into the crowd. "Uncle, I'll help you." He Yan was halfway through her words when she suddenly remembered that she was Cheng Li Su. How could the useless young master of the Shuo capital know martial arts? She was afraid that she would not be able to openly show her martial arts skills. She shouted her heart, she shouted, "Why are these people's sleeves so long? She's this cut less." The water sleeves instantly turned into short sleeves. When he used the concealed weapon again, his movements were very obvious. Just like that, He Yan shouted as she circled around the crowd. Her figure was light and graceful, as slippery as a loach. Everyone wanted to catch her, but they couldn't. The young man was screaming and cursing at the same time, making the scene somewhat comical. Xiao Ju swung her sword to block the knife of the woman in front of her. She turned her head and glanced at her. He Yan was still shouting, "Help! Murder!" She blocked a dart in front of her and kicked the face of the woman next to her. Xiao Ju's mouth twitched. The target of the singing girls was Xiao Ju. All their sinister methods and hidden weapons were aimed at Xiao Ju. Now that a young man had suddenly appeared, everything was disrupted. Yu's face was ashen. She clenched her fist and said hatefully, "Despicable." She chopped at He Yan's head. He Yan shouted, "Aya," and hid behind Xiao Ju. "Uncle, save me." She was shocked. These 10 or so women were all very skilled. It was not something that could be trained overnight. This kind of technique was more like a death squad that was specially trained to kill people. Who did Xiao Ju offend? Why would they use such a method to kill him? Among this group of women, Yu was the most skilled. But it was not the most skilled. She had countless hidden weapons. Date seed arrows, plum blossom needles, amay thorns, iron lotus. He Yan did not know how she could store so many hidden weapons in her sleeves. However, Xiao Ju did not seem to want to take the man's life. The tip of her sword avoided the vital points. He Yen knew that when he was young, his sword skills were outstanding. Now that they met again, this was the first time he saw him in action. The assassin could not get close. He was injured by the autumn sword and fell to the ground. He pulled Ying Yu's sleeve. Ying Yu was pulled forward. In the next moment, the tip of his sword was pointed at Ying Yu's throat. The young man's voice was low. It was more pleasant than the sound of the zither. It contained an unconcealable murderous intent. Who sent you? He Yen could not help but look at the bodyguard behind Yuan Baozhen. The bodyguard was standing in front of Yuan Baozhen. His face, which was hidden in the dark, was now revealed. His expression was also very flustered, as if he didn't expect this to happen and couldn't see any clues. However, He Yen saw that his index finger slowly bent into a semicircle. No one would pay attention to a bodyguard at this time. The movement of his finger was extremely small. If He Yen had not been paying attention to him, he would have missed it. Her intuition, which had been cultivated for many years, made her subconsciously turn around to look. She saw the manservant, who had been hiding at the door, pouncing towards Xiao Ju. Be careful! Xiao Ju was pointing at Ying Yu. He Yen did not care about anything else. He pushed Xiao Ju away. The man who had pounced in front of Xiao Ju was stabbed in the throat by Xiao Ju. The assassins had always been women. Who would pay attention to this manservant? Moreover, from the very first moment of the incident, this person had been hiding under the short table like any other weak servant. Who would have thought that he would be the last chess piece? What's the matter? Xiao Ju frowned and asked her. He Yen shook his head. Ying Yu, who was on the ground, suddenly laughed. In the dead silence, her laughter was particularly ear-piercing. He Yen turned his head to look. The beauty's lips were bleeding, but her expression was ruthless. He Yen took a step forward and asked, Who are you? Why do you want to harm my uncle? Ying Yu looked at He Yen with a fierce expression. If you did not come out to mess things up, this would not have happened. You'll never know who my master is. She coughed up more and more blood. The blood that flowed out was an abnormal black color. He looked at the women around her and saw that they were all the same. He Yen understood. She was indeed a death warrior. Once the assassination failed, she would commit suicide. Is that so? Xiao Ju looked at Ying Yu and suddenly smiled. His eyes were full of ridicule as he said, There are countless people in the world who want to kill me. But there is only one person who is so impatient. I'll accept your master's gift. I hope that your master can accept my gift in return. Ying Yu's expression changed greatly. But she had already taken the poison. In just a moment, her face turned ashen. Like the other 10 women, she died and no longer breathed. Xiao Ju stepped over her body and stood in the middle of the hall. He looked at Sun Xiangfu, who was hiding under the low table and trembling in fear. He reprimanded, Magistrate Sun, why don't you explain why the servants in your residence tried to assassinate me during your banquet? Are you deliberately trying to harm me? Sun Xiangfu had long been so scared that his mind was in a mess. When he heard this, he almost cried. Seeing that the assassin was gone, he dared to stand up from the short table and hurriedly explained, Commander-in-Chief, I really didn't know. Even if I had 10 times the courage, I would not dare to harm you. I only brought these singers back to the residence half a month ago. I didn't know they were assassins. Magistrate Yuan, please help me explain. I really don't know what is going on. Yuan Baozhen, who had been silent all this time, also came back to his senses. He patted his chest and said with lingering fear, Magistrate Sun, this is not a matter of whether you know or not. These singers are all people in your residence. If something really happened to Military Governor Xiao today, you will not be able to escape responsibility. I think this matter is not as simple as it seems on the surface. Let's clean up this place first and ask a coroner to see where these people came from and what their identities are. He then looked at Xiao Ju. Military Governor Xiao is also frightened. Why don't you clean up first and change to another place? Let Magistrate Sun explain what is going on. I think these singers have come prepared. Xiao Ju looked at him with a smile that was not a smile and said, "Okay." The banquet came to an abrupt end in the middle of the night, but at this moment, no one was in the mood to continue. The hall was a mess. The coroner and bailiffs quickly came over and carried the bodies of the singers away. Yuan Baozhen asked, "Do you want to search their bodies to see if they have any keepsakes?" Since they have been in the Sun residence for half a month, the keepsakes should have been hidden well. Why would they leave it on their bodies for people to search? If they really do have it, I'm afraid they are trying to frame someone else. Xiao Ju stared at Yuan Baozhen and said lightly, "Magistrate Yuan, don't fall into their trap." Yuan Baozhen's scalp tightened. Xiao Ju did not pay attention to him anymore. He turned his head and saw He Yan standing there in a daze. He suddenly remembered that she seemed to have not said anything since just now. Was she frightened? "Why are you standing there in a daze? Let's go," he said to He Yan. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt his sleeve being pulled. "Uncle." The young man raised his head. The smile on his face was gone, and there was a rare trace of nervousness. His gaze was also blank. It fell on his face as if he was not looking at him. He said, "Just now when the servant rushed over, I pushed you away. He scattered a handful of things on my face. My eyes hurt a little." His voice was small, and it was not as arrogant as before. He was a little flustered. "I think I can't see." The doctors went in one by one and quickly came out. They all looked terrified. Everyone shook their heads and sighed. Xiao Ju's face became more and more gloomy. Sun Xiangfu watched from the side with fear. Who would have thought that Xiao Ju's nephew, the young man who always followed Xiao Ju, would have his eyes injured by an assassin? The doctors could only open his eyelids to take a look. The young man only said that he could not see. There were no godly doctors in Liangzhou City, and all the doctors that could be found were all useless. The powder on the ground had long been blown away by the wind, leaving no trace behind. They did not even know what kind of poison it was, so how could they treat it? Fortunately, only the young man's eyes were injured. The rest of his body was fine. Otherwise, if his life was threatened, the governor would be furious. "Governor," Sun Xiangfu said, "this official will go and find another doctor. The young master is a good person, and he will be fine." Xiao Ju said, "Get lost." Everyone could hear the anger in his words. Sun Xiangfu did not dare to anger Xiao Ju at this juncture. He hurriedly said a few words, and hurriedly left as if he was running for his life. Xiao Ju stood outside the room. He paused for a moment and then walked in. He happened to pass by the last doctor. He saw the young man sitting on the bed with a calm expression. He did not know what he was thinking. After a moment, he used his hands to gesture in front of his face, as if he could not believe that he could not see. Because she had cried out in pain, the doctor did not dare to use any medicine. He only found some soothing and cooling herbs and applied them on a clean cloth. He used the cloth to cover her eyes. He Yan had always been cheerful. Sometimes he was smart, sometimes he was stupid. As for whether he was really stupid or just pretending to be stupid, no one knew. His eyes were very clever. They were clear and bright. When he stared, he looked a little silly. When he curved his eyes, they were full of vitality and slyness. Now that the cloth covered her eyes, the young man's face became unfamiliar in an instant. Even his previous lively expressions seemed to be blurred. Xiao Ju suddenly remembered that during the banquet, when Ning Yu and the others tried to assassinate him, He Yan did not waver when he rushed over. Even if He Yan did not mention it, he would not drink the wine poured by Ning Yu. However, the fear and anger in the young man's voice did not seem to be fake. It even made people's hearts tremble. He walked in and stopped in front of He Yan's bed. He Yan seemed to feel something, but he was not sure. He tilted his head and asked carefully, "Is someone here?" Xiao Ju did not say anything. "Is there no one?" She whispered again and turned her head to the side to be quiet. On the way to Liangzhou City, He Yan was very talkative. Xiao Ju did not talk to her, so she went to look for Fei Nu. Fei Nu did not talk much. Song Tao Tao, who appeared later, took over this vacancy. When a person who was always chattering suddenly became quiet, people would not be used to it. This young man was only 16 years old, but he was different from ordinary people. When he found out that he could not see, he was a little flustered. However, he did not wail or cry. It was as if he quickly accepted this fact. However, when he sat quietly, it made people feel a little sorry for him. It was probably because he was too thin and weak. Looking at him like this, he looked very pitiful. Xiaoju asked, "How do you feel?" "Uncle?" He Yan was surprised for a moment, then said, "I'm just not used to it." She reached out as if she wanted to touch her eyes, but what she touched was a piece of cloth. She immediately retracted her hand and said, "Are my eyes really blind?" Even when he asked this, his tone was calm. Xiaoju should have said yes, but at this moment, he actually could not say it. This young man with extraordinary skills was at the prime of his life. With his talent, he would definitely be promoted in a few years in the Liangzhou City Guards. A pearl in a puddle of muddy water would not be buried no matter what. However, losing a pair of eyes was a different situation. Not to mention the impact it would have on the future, it would take courage for him to get used to these dark days. After all, it was not as if he could not see from the moment he was born. Having something and then losing it was much more unbearable than not having it in the first place. "Uncle, you're not sad for me, are you?" He Yan suddenly asked. Although his eyes were covered by a piece of cloth, the tone in which she said this made one imagine that if it were any other time, her eyes would be wide open and filled with mischief and ridicule. "Maybe you're still blaming yourself?" She smiled and said, "Actually, you don't have to blame yourself for me. You should praise me. Maybe if you praise me, I'll think that everything I've done was worth it." "Praise you for what?" Xiaoju said indifferently. "Of course you're praising me for being amazing." The young man's voice was a little surprised, but also a little proud. "If I didn't remind you not to drink just now, this assassination attempt would not have happened. I'm your savior, am I not amazing?" She still had the heart to think about these things at a time like this? Xiaoju was speechless. He did not know whether to say that this young man was careless or that he really did not care. "You don't seem to be sad." Xiaoju said, "You can't see. Maybe you'll never be able to see again." As soon as she said this, the young man's fingers curled up. Although it was very subtle, Xiaoju still caught it. He was afraid, and it was not as easy as he made it seem. "God won't be so bad to me, right?" He Yan said, "I've never done anything bad in my life. Why are you treating me like this?" "If you really want to treat me like this, then I can't do anything. There are many kinds of blind people. I'm so good, so I'll be the best of them all." Xiaoju was slightly startled. This sentence sounded strangely familiar, as if he had heard it a long time ago. "But uncle, are you going to give up so early? I think you should find me a few more doctors to take a look at me. Maybe I can be cured." "Why do you say it as if it's incurable?" he asked. Xiaoju looked at him. Although the young man tried his best to appear normal, he was still a little tired. He said, "Have a good rest." Then he turned and left. Xiaoju left the room, and the room returned to its original calm. Because there might be assassins in the house, all the servants in the house were evacuated. Only Fei Nu, one of Xiaoju's own men, remained in the courtyard. He Yan stretched out his hand, as if he wanted to untie the knot in his head. After a while, he put down his hand and did not continue. She lowered her head and muttered, "Dingy." Yuan Baozhen's bodyguard, He Rufei's former servant, the person who personally gave her a bowl of poison in her previous life. She heard Yuan Baozhen call his name. His name was Ding. In the study, Sun Xiangfu's face was scrunched up. He was about to cry. The person sitting in front of him was Yuan Baozhen. Yuan Baozhen said, "Magistrate Sun, I can't help you with this." "Magistrate Yuan, you can't leave me in the lurch. Right now, the only person who can help me is you." Sun Xiangfu said with a sad face, "I really don't know what happened to those assassins today. Now that the Commander-in-Chief is angry and young Master Cheng can't see, Commander-in-Chief Xiao will definitely vent his anger on this lowly official. I'm just a county magistrate, how can I bear the anger of General Feng Yun?" Sun Xiangfu had personally witnessed the close relationship between Xiaoju and Cheng Lisu, this pair of uncle and nephew. When Cheng Lisu and Sun Ling got into an argument, Xiao Ju rushed over to protect Qing Li Su. It was truly frightening. At that time, it was just a small argument. Now that Qing Li Su was blind, wouldn't Xiao Ju pay with her life? Sun Xiangfu thought of this and began to tremble. I don't think military governor Xiao is such an unreasonable person. Yuan Baozhen comforted. As the two were talking, Xiao Ju arrived. Sun Xiangfu didn't have time to beg Yuan Baozhen. He lifted his robe and knelt in front of Xiao Ju. What is the meaning of this? Xiao Ju looked at him coldly and asked, Governor, I really don't know what is going on right now. I was also tricked by them. Even if I had 100 times the courage, I wouldn't dare to harm you. Sun Xiangfu began to cry out his innocence. Stand up. Xiao Ju glanced at him as if she didn't like his actions. She walked in and sat down on the chair at the head of the table. She looked at him and said, Tell me how you met them. She paused and then added, Those assassins. This, she believed that he wasn't the mastermind? When Sun Xiangfu noticed this, he was overjoyed. Yuan Baozhen's eyes flashed but he didn't make a sound. Sun Xiangfu hurriedly stood up. He didn't even brush off the dust on his robe and retreated to a lower chair to sit down. In this way, he and Yuan Baozhen sat in a position where Xiao Ju was the leader. Sun Xiangfu wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, Actually, they have only been in the Fu for half a month. At first, there was a new opera troupe in the city. The leader of this opera troupe was an old woman. She brought a group of beautiful girls to the city. She said that there was a drought in the place where they lived and there was no way to survive, so they moved to Liangzhou City. They set up a stage in the east of Liangzhou City and performed 3 times a day. In the beginning, only commoners came to take a look. Not only were these girls beautiful, but they also sang very well. They were very eye-catching and gradually became famous. Many nobles also came to know about them. After a while, the news reached Sun Ling's ears. Sun Ling had touched all the beautiful girls in Liangzhou City. The night Sun Ling watched the show, he asked someone to buy the group of girls to perform in the Fu. The leader of the troupe, the old woman, refused and was injured by Sun Ling's servants. When she was about to be beaten to death, Yingyu stood up and said that she was willing to persuade her sisters to enter the Fu. She only hoped that Sun Ling would let their leader go. Sun Ling generously did as he was told. Yingyu really managed to persuade the group of girls. After entering the Fu, they were very gentle. After entering the Sun Fu, Sun Ling found that this group of girls not only knew how to sing, but were also proficient in the 4 arts. Among them, Yingyu was the most outstanding. Sun Xiangfu also knew about Yingyu. Sun Xiangfu was different from Sun Ling. Sun Ling only knew how to eat, drink, and play, but Sun Xiangfu was a bit ambitious. Being the county magistrate of Liangzhou City was good, but what if he could go further? Even if he didn't take another step forward, the position of county magistrate wasn't really stable. He had to bribe people from top to bottom. He had to maintain good relations with both familiar and unfamiliar people. For example, he wasn't very familiar with the new commander of the Liang Province Guards. Sun Xiangfu asked Yingyu to come. He had Yingyu hold a banquet in the Fu to liven things up for the guests. In any case, there were 2 guests, Imperial Censor Yuan Baozhen and Right Army Commander Xiao Ju. As long as he got on the good side of one of them, he could rest easy. Although Sun Ling was a bit dissatisfied, there was nothing he could do. In the days that followed, Yingyu seriously brought her sisters to practice dancing and singing. Every time Sun Xiangfu went over to watch, he was very satisfied. This servant was also very smart. When she entered the Fu for the leader of the troupe, she was a bit unwilling. After experiencing the extravagance of the Sun Fu, she became even more clever. Sometimes, when Sun Xiangfu talked to her, he could feel her desire for power. That's right. People walk to higher places while water flows to lower places. This was the case for everyone, men and women alike. Up until tonight's incident at the banquet, Sun Xiangfu still thought this way. When he talked about these things, probably because he was embarrassed, he added a bit of embellishment. However, without those unimportant embellishments, it was just one thing. Sun Ling was lustful, but who knew that he would pick up a poisonous snake? I really didn't think that they were assassins. Women? How can women be assassins? Sun Xiangfu said. It wasn't clear whether he was saying this to Xiao Ju or to himself. To the father and son of the Sun family, women had always been playthings, or things that were sent to win the favor of their superiors. Now that he had been played by a woman, it was hard to describe his feelings at the moment. These assassins entered the Fu half a month ago? Xiao Ju asked. Sun Xiangfu nodded. That's right. This is all my fault. I didn't carefully check their identities. I only thought that they were women who had no relatives in the city and were weak and pitiful, so he tried his best to say that he took pity on their weakness and brought them into the Fu, but Xiao Ju didn't pay any attention to him. She only played with the teacup in her hand and said lightly, half a month ago, Magistrate's son didn't send me an invitation to the Fu. Sun Xiangfu paused. But half a month ago, official Yuan should have known that you would arrive in Liangzhou. He tilted his head and looked at Yuan Baozhen with a half-smile. Hearing this, Yuan Baozhen replied with a smile. What does Governor mean? Are you suspecting me? Governor, why don't you think about it? If I really arranged for these women, how could I be sure that Magistrate's son would take them back to the Fu? I can't predict things like a god. Of course you can't predict things like a god. Xiao Ju's lips curved slightly and said unhurriedly, you only need to write a letter to Magistrate Sunday. She was saying that Yuan Baozhen and Sun Xiangfu had set this up together. Sun Xiangfu finally thought that he had cleared himself of suspicion, but Xiao Ju's words immediately made him sweat profusely. He hurriedly waved his hand and said, No. Governor, I really didn't. I don't know what's going on. I also didn't receive a letter from official Yuan. Yuan Baozhen also stopped smiling. He looked at Xiao Ju and said seriously, Governor, with just one sentence, you have convicted me and Magistrate's son, but you don't even have evidence. It really makes one's heart cold. I don't have any deep enmity with you, and this is the first time I've eaten with you. How could I harm you? He was born with a kind face, and his words were very sincere, but there was also a hint of sadness at being misunderstood. Xiao Ju stared at him for a while. After a moment, he smiled and said indifferently, It's just a joke. Official Yuan doesn't need to take it seriously. He withdrew his smile and became cold again. He was like a knife that was about to be unsheathed, hiding the fierceness of a mountain storm. However, there are many suspicious points in this matter. Before I figure it out, I'm afraid I'll have to disturb you for a few days, he said. Governor, you're going to live here? After the assassination attempt, normal people would only feel that this place was not safe and would leave as soon as possible to avoid being schemed against again. Why was he still staying here? Yes, the young governor put down his teacup and stood up. He was tall and slender, and his eyes were slightly cold. Live here and catch the thief. Chapter 96. At night, there was a row of soldiers standing in front of Sun Fu's gate. It did not make sense to use soldiers to guard his own gate. However, Sun Xiangfu was like a bird that was startled by the twang of a bow. He did not care so much. All of the servants in the Fu were interrogated one by one. For the time being, nothing suspicious was found. Right Army Governor Xiao Ju and Imperial Censor Yuan Baozhen both lived in the Fu. Sun Xiangfu also noticed the undercurrent under these two's calmness. He sat in the room and sighed. Sun Ling had already learned the whole story from the servants and said, Father, why are you still worried about this? Sun Xiang felt extremely lucky. If you hadn't been so meddlesome and brought those women back to the residence, none of this would have happened. Father, I took them back to the Fu for my own use. I did not ask you to use them to entertain guests. Sun Ling could not take it anymore and rolled his eyes. Now that there is trouble, how can you blame me? Those women are useless. If they wanted to assassinate someone, they should have succeeded in one try. Who knows who will benefit if they died for nothing? Before he finished, Sun Ling's mouth was covered by Sun Xiangfu, who rushed over. Sun Xiangfu looked around and scolded, Do you want to die? Saying such things. I did not say anything wrong. Sun Ling moved closer and said in a low voice, Father, do you also not like that Xiao Ju? Sun Xiangfu did not speak. Was this a question of whether he liked her or not? Compared to whether he liked Xiao Ju or not, he should be more worried about whether Xiao Ju liked him or not. I heard that military governor Xiao and Darren Yuan seem to have some disagreements. When the two of them fight, you just need to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Darren Yuan is not bad and is friendly. You can help him secretly. The enemy of an enemy is a friend. Sun Ling said, if something really happens in the end, you will have gotten rid of Xiao Ju and become friends with Darren Yuan. Wouldn't that be killing two birds with one stone? He thought his words made sense. Sun Xiangfu suddenly slapped him on the head. Sun Xiangfu scolded, how can it be as simple as you say? You didn't see it today. Xiao Ju. He thought of something and fear flashed across his eyes. She's not easy to deal with. Inside the room, Yuan Baozhen sat in front of the table, his expression uncertain. The average-looking guard was standing behind him, but his eyes were also flickering. Xiao Ju is suspicious of me. After a moment, Yuan Baozhen said, if today's matter doesn't work, I'm afraid there won't be another chance. Why would he suspect you? The bodyguard, the man named Ding Yi, asked. I don't know. Thinking of what happened in Sun Xiangfu's study, Yuan Baozhen was angry. Xiao Ju's suspicion was blatant and her tone was arrogant. He did not know how to respond. He had just arrived in Liangzhou City and had never interacted with Xiao Ju before. No matter what, Xiao Ju should not suspect him. Also, how could Qing Lisu be blind? Yuan Baozhen frowned. Was this also arranged in advance? Ding Yi shook his head. I've never heard of it. There was no point in suspecting him. Now that all the assassins were dead, no one was alive. Even if he was full of questions, there was no one to answer. That Qing Lisu is a bit strange, Ding Yi said. If he hadn't stopped them today, perhaps Xiao Ju would have drunk the poisoned wine. With his reminder, Yuan Baozhen remembered something. At the banquet tonight, when Xiao Ju raised her wine cup, Qing Lisu's shout of, "Don't drink it," came suddenly and loudly, causing the assassins to act prematurely. If he hadn't stopped them, they wouldn't be in such a difficult situation now. How did he know that the wine was poisoned? Yuan Baozhen muttered. After a moment, he stroked the oil lamp on the table and said, since Xiao Ju and the others are in the residence, this is our chance. I'll test Qing Lisu tomorrow. If this young man is really blind, maybe we can use him to tie down Xiao Ju and save the country. He Yen didn't know that in these invisible places, there was a surging undercurrent. At this moment, she was sitting in the room, arguing with Fei Nu. After her eyes were damaged, Xiao Ju called Fei Nu to guard He Yan's room. After all, there were already assassins in the Sun residence. Who knew if there would be more hidden people among the servants? He Yen didn't feel at ease if he was alone. With Fei Nu guarding, it was much safer. Brother Fei Nu, please leave. I can really do it myself. He Yen had a headache. You can't see. Fei Nu's reply was very stiff. Young master asked me to guard you. Then you can just guard the door. If you were to be my personal servant, I would be very uncomfortable. He Yen replied seriously. Can you leave? Forgive me for not being able to comply. Why are you the same as your master? Can't you be more reasonable? Xiao Ju had just arrived at the door when he heard this sentence. He stopped and stood at the door. What happened? Fei Nu said, young master. Without waiting for Fei Nu to finish speaking, He Yen had already looked in the direction of the door. Her eyes were still covered with cloth and her hands were clutching some clothes. Is uncle here? Brother Fei Nu is crazy. He wants to help me bathe. Fei Nu's lips moved. He seemed to be speechless at her insulted expression. He explained, he can't see. I'm afraid, uncle. It's not like you don't know that I have a fiancé. My body is as clean as ice and as clean as jade. How can it be seen by others? That young man's voice was bright and cheerful. The desolation and panic from before had already been swept away, and he was back to his usual unreasonable appearance. If I were to break up because of your marriage, big brother Fei Nu, would you be able to compensate me with a fiancé? She muttered, you don't even have one yourself. Fei Nu, Xiao Ju looked at her and mocked, are you sure you won't drown? The bathtub was placed behind the screen in the middle of the room. The water was not deep. Perhaps it was because the days in the Sun residence were so extravagant that there was a circle of flower petals scattered on top of it. He Yen had never used such an exquisite flower bath when she was a woman. Now that she was a man, she actually used it. Uncle, did you forget that in Liangzhou, I could shoot a sparrow in the sky blindfolded? How can I drown? He Yen said, don't worry. Besides, if I really become blind, I can't let others do things for me for the rest of my life. Uncle, you have that possibility, but I'd better forget about it. Fei Nu was also speechless. He had seen many brothers in the Nine Banners Battalion. Occasionally there would be some who were missing an arm or a leg. Although they could pass their days with a smile, in any case, they would be depressed for a period of time. He Yen was the first person he had ever seen to recover from this kind of mood. If it were not for the cloth covering her face, people would wonder if she was really blind. Xiao Ju saw that she was full of vigor, so she did not feel like paying attention to her. She only said to Fei Nu, come out. Fei Nu followed Xiao Ju out. He Yen finally breathed a sigh of relief when the door was closed. She did not remove the cloth covering her face. She took off her clothes and entered the bathtub, soaking her whole body in the water. If someone else was here, they would be surprised. She did this just like any other ordinary person. Her movements were without the slightest hesitation, as if she could see everything. The temperature of the water was just right. She had always bathed in the river next to the city guard station. The river water was ice cold, so it was not as comfortable as this. However, even though it was comfortable, she did not dare to be greedy. The steam rose and blurred her figure. The smile on He Yan's face also relaxed. She thought that she would be attending the banquet, but she did not expect that she would have to stay here for a few more days. In this way, coupled with the fact that she could not see, there would be more people serving her. She would have to be more careful of her identity being exposed. She still remembered Ding Yi's last movement at the banquet. That subtle movement of bending his finger. If she had not been staring at Ding Yi, she would have missed it. But because she recognized Ding Yi, she knew that the servant who rushed out to attack Xiao Ju was arranged by Ding Yi. Then this matter became very strange. Ding Yi was He Rufei's servant. Yuan Baozhen was also He Rufei's friend. Ding Yi colluded with the assassins at the banquet to assassinate Xiao Ju. In a way, it could be said that it was He Rufei's idea. But why did He Rufei want to kill Xiao Ju? In her previous life, when she was He Rufei, she and Xiao Ju did not interfere with each other's business. They were even classmates in the Xianchang gymnasium, so they could be considered friends. Now that He Rufei had returned to his original self, he did not have any enmity with Xiao Ju. Why would he use such a vicious method to kill Xiao Ju? Perhaps she should go talk to Yuan Baozhen. At night, He Yen and Xiao Ju slept in the same room as Fei Nu. Because they were afraid that there would be other assassins in the Sun residence, they did not separate. However, there were many courtyards in the Sun residence. This room was divided into an inner room and an outer room. Naturally, second young master Xiao lived in the inner room. In the outer room, Fei Nu and He Yen each slept on one side of the outer room. He Yen felt that this way of sleeping was as if she was protecting Xiao Ju. Thinking about how she was injured because of Xiao Ju, she did not expect that she would not even be able to sleep on the inner room. Thinking about it, she really felt that it was not worth it. However, she did not think for long before He Yen fell asleep. This sleep was actually very peaceful. Early the next morning, He Yen was woken up by Fei Nu. She sat up, her eyes were filled with darkness. She subconsciously asked, "What time is it?" 7 in the morning. Fei Nu replied. He Yen touched the cloth covering her eyes again. This time, she directly untied it. From darkness to light, if one was able to see, they would definitely have to squint their eyes to adapt. However, He Yen only opened her eyes and did not feel the slightest bit of discomfort. Fei Nu's heart sank. She asked, "Can you see?" He Yen blankly shook her head. There was a moment of silence. "Maybe it will be fine in a few days." Fei Nu clumsily comforted her. He did not sympathize with He Yen. However, he heard that during the banquet last night, He Yen not only reminded Xiao Ju, but also personally helped Xiao Ju deal with the assassins. These were two different things. Although this young man's identity was suspicious, he had not harmed Xiao Ju so far. Is uncle not here? He Yan asked. Young master went out. He Yan nodded again. After thinking for a while, she covered her eyes with the cloth again. Fei Nu was surprised. Why are you wearing it again? The herbal medicine had already been used for a day and was no longer effective. Today, He Yan did not complain that her eyes hurt, so the cloth was useless. Wearing it was actually uncomfortable. It's better to wear it to remind others that I can't see now. He Yan smiled. People have to be more tolerant towards a blind person. I can't avoid others, but others can avoid me, right? Between wearing the cloth and not wearing it, it was obvious that the former looked more like a blind person. Fei Nu's heart trembled. It was as if something flashed through his mind. After a moment he did not say anything. He only said, "Let's go and eat first." He Yan nodded. Xiao Ju was not here. After Fei Nu and He Yan freshened up, they sat in the room and ate. The food was also bought by Fei Nu in advance. He Yan did not want Fei Nu to help him. He ate very slowly, but his movements were steady. He did not spill the soup. The maids that Sun Xiangfu called were all dismissed. With Xiao Ju as an example, He Yan did not dare to trust any of the maids here. After eating, Fei Nu ordered the maids to clear away the leftovers on the table. He Yan sat alone for less than a moment when someone's voice sounded. The footsteps were very light. If it was not for her excellent hearing, it would be difficult for ordinary people to hear. It was not one person, but two people. Xiao Ju did not need to be like this. When Fei Nu left, He Yan already knew who it was. However, she did not show it on her face. She still sat quietly as if in a daze. The footsteps fell in front of her. It seemed that the person was carefully observing her. He Yan's eyes were covered with the cloth and did not move. After a while, the person did not seem to find any flaws. Suddenly he said, "Young Master Cheng." He Yan jumped in fright and almost fell from the chair. She stood up in a hurry and knocked her foot on the table leg. She cried out in pain. Someone came to help her and said, "Are you okay?" He Yan opened her hands and grabbed randomly. She said, "Who is it?" He grabbed the corner of a person's clothes. That person comforted her kindly. "I am Yuan Baozhen. I'm not a bad person. Young master, don't worry." He Yan calmed down and breathed a sigh of relief. She said with lingering fear, "So it is Imperial Censor Yuan. I thought it was those assassins again. I was scared to death. Why didn't you say anything when you came in?" I am sorry. I did not expect to scare young master." Yuan Baozhen said with a smile, "I heard that young master is blind, so I came to see you." When he said this, although his tone was concerned and distressed, there was no smile on his face. He stared at He Yan's expression, as if he wanted to see whether He Yan was really blind or not. However, He Yan's eyes were covered with cloth and could not see anything. If one could not see a person's eyes, it would be difficult to see through their expressions. His head was leaning to the extreme. Normal people might not be able to notice this, but He Yan could clearly feel it. The person she grabbed was Ding Yi. Yuan Baozhen was greedy for life and afraid of accidents, so he would not go forward directly. However, his eyes were like maggots in a tarsal bone. It was hard to ignore. Even so, He Yan did not show it at all. She seemed to be a little distressed, but with a youthful indifference, she said, "Yes, I can't see now." However, Uncle said that he would find a godly doctor to cure me, so it should only be temporary. It would have been better if she did not say this. Once she said this, it almost made people believe that she really could not see. This was because the title of godly doctor carried a kind of comforting and perfunctory meaning. It was used to coax children. Yuan Baozhen sat down on a chair next to her. He shook his head and sighed, "I did not expect young master to be injured on this trip. Fortunately, no life was harmed, and Military Governor Xiao is also fine." As he said this, he seemed to think of something. He looked at He Yan and asked in confusion, "Young master, last night at the banquet, how did you know that there was an assassin at that time and did not let the governor drink that cup of wine?" No one knew whether that cup of wine was poisonous or not. Therefore, Yuan Baozhen asked very coincidentally and did not mention the wine at all. He only said that there was an assassination. He Yan sneered in her heart. He was testing her. She raised her head, as if she did not know where Yuan Baozhen was. She hesitated for a moment before saying, I did not know there was an assassin at that time. I only saw a flying insect fly into Uncle's wine cup. Ding Yi and Yuan Baozhen did not expect this answer. The two of them were stunned at the same time. Yuan Baozhen asked, Flying insect? That's right, you don't know, but my uncle loves cleanliness, He Yan sighed. If his clothes are stained with dust, he will immediately change them. If his shoes are stained with mud, he will never wear them a second time. There are flying insects in the wine cup. If he drank it, I don't know how angry he would be. At that time, I only wanted to remind him not to drink it and change the cup. Who knew that there would be an assassin? I was also shocked. So this was the reason? Yuan Baozhen was somewhat skeptical. At that time, Cheng Lisu's scream was so shrill and anxious that it made his heart tighten. So this was the reason? But if it was not for this reason, how could he, a young master who did not know anything, predict the future and know that there was a problem with the wine? Perhaps it was really a coincidence that he had stumbled upon it? Yuan Baozhen did not know what to feel. Who would have known that a good game of chess would be ruined here? His heart was half angry and half suspicious. When he looked at Cheng Lisu again, he only felt that this young man was annoying. But Cheng Lisu clearly did not know how annoying he was. Instead, she seemed to be particularly close to Yuan Baozhen because he came to see him. She smiled and said, I heard from my uncle that Imperial Censor Yuan came from Shuojing? That's right. Then does Imperial Censor Yuan know General Fei Hong He Rufei? She asked. When she said this, the room was silent for a moment. Ding Yi, who was very close to He Yan, placed his hand on the long sword at his waist. In an instant, a murderous aura rushed towards him. The young man did not make up his mind. With a smile on his face, he looked in Yuan Baozhen's direction and waited for his answer. After a moment, Yuan Baozhen stared at He Yan's face and asked, Little Gongzi, why did you suddenly ask about General Fei Hong? Doesn't everyone say that General Fei Hong and my uncle are sworn enemies, and that their skills and achievements are on par? I have never seen General Fei Hong before, so I don't know how his skills are, and I don't know how he looks. Since Imperial Censor Yuan came from Shuojing and is also an official of the same court, perhaps you have seen him before. I heard that he used to wear a mask. Now that he has taken off his mask, what do you think? Is he good-looking? The Cheng Lisu, in front of him, spoke in a light tone. She did not know that the bodyguard beside her had almost pulled out his sword and asked the same question as those naughty young men from Shuojing. Yuan Baozhen let out a sigh of relief. For a moment, he thought that this young man had discovered something and almost wanted to kill him. I have seen him before. He is born very handsome. However, he cannot be compared to Military Governor Xiao. Yuan Baozhen replied with a smile. Not as good as my uncle? He Yan was disappointed and quickly said, Then, is Imperial Censor Yuan close to General Fei Hong? If they are close, when I return to Shuojing in the future, can you introduce me to General Fei Hong? I have heard many of his deeds and want to see for myself what kind of person he is. She said in a small voice, But this matter must not be known by my uncle. I am afraid that he will punish me by making me copy books. Little Gongzi, I am afraid you will be disappointed. Yuan Baozhen shook his head and said, General Fei Hong and I only know each other and are not close. If you want to introduce me, it would be better to have Military Governor Xiao introduce you to him. He Yan whispered, How would I dare to let him introduce me to him? As she said this, Yuan Baozhen looked at her and suddenly said, I came today because I was afraid that little Gongzi would be sad because of your eyes. But now that I have seen you, it seems that I worried too much. Little Gongzi does not seem to be very sad. He Yan asked curiously, Why does Imperial Censor Yuan say this? Last night, I cried for 2 whole hours. If it was not for my uncle scolding me and saying that he would throw me out if I did not shut up, you would not be able to see me now. Moreover, I later understood who I was. I was the young master of the right sector's Naolang residence. Although I didn't know anything, my uncle was the right army's commander-in-chief. As long as my uncle was around, I would definitely be able to see. My uncle said that there will be a godly doctor that can cure my eyes. There will definitely be a godly doctor that can cure my eyes. Her words were full of worship and trust toward Xiaoju. Yuan Baozhen was speechless and did not know what to say. He Yan's words were watertight and did not find any loopholes. But he was still worried. Little Gongzi is right. Military Governor Xiao is omnipotent and will definitely find a way. It seems that I was too narrow-minded. He smiled and stood up. Since that is the case, I should also leave. Little Gongzi is not feeling well right now. You should go lie down on the bed. He looked around. Why is there not a single servant in this room? I was the one who asked them to leave. He Yan smiled. After what happened last night, I do not dare to use the servants in this fu. Does Imperial Censor Yuan dare to use them? You are very brave. Yuan Baozhen smiled, but you cannot see right now. Do you need someone to serve you? Fei Nu will serve me. Moreover, I can find my way there. She smiled. Imperial Censor Yuan, do not worry. I can do it myself. Yuan Baozhen smiled. Little Gongzi is clever. Then I will leave first. After saying this, he turned and left. But when he reached the door, he turned back and stood at the door without moving. In the room, Ding Yi did not move a single step. When the two of them came in, the one talking was Yuan Baozhen. Ding Yi did not speak. He Yan easily thought that there was only one person in the room. Yuan Baozhen stood at the door and gave Ding Yi a look. He Yan stood up and walked shakily into the room. Ding Yi was right in front of her. She could feel that there was an email piercer hidden in her sleeve. She had taken it from Yu last night. She had already thought about how to dodge if Ding Yi attacked her. She also knew how to stab this email piercer into his heart. The young man's eyes were covered with cloth. He did not reach out to take it. She held onto the wall and slowly walked into the room. The people in the room were probably afraid that she would trip because of her inconvenience, so they moved all the chairs to the side. From the table to the bed, there was nothing. She only needed to hold onto the wall and feel her way through. He Yan did the same. She walked until she was close to the bed. Ding Yi bent down and placed a stool in front of her. The young man did not feel anything and took a step forward. With a clang, he tripped and fell forward. He fell at a bad time and hit the edge of the bed. He screamed and his forehead immediately became swollen. He fell to the ground. Half of his body was on the ground and his hand was scraped. He did not get up for a long time. Ding Yi shook his head at Yuan Baozhen. Yuan Baozhen saw this and turned to leave. Ding Yi also quietly followed him. He Yan was the only one left in the room. He Yan covered his head and screamed in pain. No one saw, but she sneered. Chapter 97. He Yan did not sit up immediately. Instead, she held her head and groaned. She was thinking about something else. Yuan Baozhen was really here to test her. First, he wanted to know how she found out about the wine. Second, he wanted to see if she was really blind. This person was very meticulous. He even asked Ding Yi to put a stool there to see her reaction. If He Yan's response wasn't right in the slightest, this pair of master and servant would have other thoughts. She had excellent hearing and heard Ding Yi's movements. She also knew that Yuan Baozhen did not leave immediately. That was why she was here to cooperate with them and act out what Yuan Baozhen wanted to see. But Yuan Baozhen was testing her. Wasn't she also testing Yuan Baozhen? They obviously had a close relationship, but she insisted that they only knew each other. He Rufei's servant, Ding Yi, would not follow him here. There was indeed something wrong with the wine. But what puzzled He Yan the most was what role He Rufei played in this matter. Did he and Yuan Baozhen conspire to murder Xiaoju? Or was it He Rufei who instigated it? Or were they working for someone else? Next, she had to follow Ding Yi and find out what the two of them were up to. There was no movement outside. He Yan's "io" became louder. There was movement behind her. It was Fei Nu's voice. He asked, "What happened to you?" "I hurt my head just now." He Yan blankly reached out to grab him. "Brother Fei Nu, come and help me. I sprained my ankle." Slave Fei answered and went forward to help her onto the couch. He Yan's eyes were covered with a cloth. Therefore, Fei Nu could not see her emotions from her eyes. Naturally, he did not know what He Yan was thinking. In fact, the act just now was not only for Yuan Baozhen, but also for Fei Nu. Yuan Baozhen and Ding Yi were so focused on testing He Yan that they didn't notice that Fei Nu had been standing at the door and listening to what was going on inside. They did not notice, but He Yan did. Fei Nu only ordered people to remove the bowls and plates. Why did he leave for so long? It was nothing more than the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. He Yan didn't know why, but he always felt that Xiao Ju and Fei Nu didn't trust her. This wasn't a big deal. Of course, they wouldn't trust someone they didn't know. However, she sensed that not only did Xiao Ju not trust her, but she was also wary and suspicious of her. He Yan was also confused. She didn't think she had done anything that would make people suspicious. Now that she was here, she didn't even have any interactions with Yuan Baozhen in the past. She didn't know why she was suspected. Forget it, if they were suspicious, then so be it. One act was enough to deceive two people. He Yan said, "Brother Fei Nu, where did you go just now? That imperial censor Yuan came to sit for a while, but you didn't see him." Fei Nu avoided her question and only asked, "How's your head?" He Yan touched her head and said, "It's swollen. I don't know when it'll go away." She sighed heavily again. "This is really a trap. I think that little brother of mine is quite smart. It's right that he didn't come. This is much more dangerous than being forced into a marriage. If Cheng Lisu was here, she wouldn't know what would happen. Sit down and rest for a while." Fei Nu's voice was emotionless. "I'll be at the door. Call me if you need anything." He left again. He Yan lay on the bed. She was covered with a cloth, so Fei Nu couldn't see her expression. She also couldn't see Fei Nu's reaction. She thought that he was expressionless. She didn't know when Xiao Ju would come back. By the time Xiao Ju came back, it was already late at night. On this day, He Yan and Fei Nu stayed in the Sun residence and didn't do anything. The wine and dishes that Sun Xiangfu sent over had to be tested for poison with silver needles. Because He Yan couldn't see, she simply slept in the room for the whole day. Fei Nu also stood guard at the door for the whole day. When Xiao Ju came back, Fei Nu, who was sleeping on the bed, immediately woke up. He got up and walked to Xiao Ju's side, saying, "Young master." Xiao Ju indicated for him to follow her into the room. Fei Nu glanced at He Yan on the bed. Under the dim light, she was sleeping soundly. When Fei Nu and He Yan entered the room, they didn't see the youth sleeping soundly on the bed. Her hands were gently tapping the mattress under her body. He Yan obviously wasn't asleep. After sleeping for the whole day, how could she continue to sleep at night? She wasn't a pig raised in the village. Second young master Xiao obviously had something to say to his confidant. She guessed that Fei Nu would also tell this commander-in-chief everything that happened here today. He Yan didn't have the guts to listen to the master and servant whispering to each other. Xiao Ju wasn't Yuan Baozhen. She knew real martial arts. Once she exposed herself, there would be too much trouble and the losses would outweigh the gains. However, she could imagine what Fei Nu would say to her. He Yan felt that she could fool Fei Nu with her acting today. As for whether she could fool Xiao Ju, she didn't know. In the room, the lamp was lit. Xiao Ju placed her sword on the table and sat down on the chair in front of the table. "Young master, Yuan Baozhen came by today," Fei Nu said. Xiao Ju looked up and asked, "What's the matter?" "From what I can see, he came specially to look for He Yan." Yuan Baozhen said a few words to He Yan. He recounted the conversation between Yuan Baozhen and He Yan to Xiao Ju. In the end, he said, Yuan Baozhen seemed to be testing He Yan. Xiao Ju pondered for a moment and asked, "What do you think?" From He Yan's answer, it seems that he doesn't know Yuan Baozhen. There were no flaws. However, it could also be that the two of them were acting together. Overall, He Yan's suspicions can be cleared for the time being. Cleared? Xiao Ju curled his lips into a smile and said, "Slave Fei, the liar in our house has even deceived you." Fei Nu was startled and didn't understand. Don't forget, when He Yan competed with Wang Ba in archery, she once blindfolded herself and shot a bird in the sky. Do you think that someone with such good hearing wouldn't be able to tell that Yuan Baozhen's bodyguard placed a stool in front of her? Young master, you mean? He could have avoided the stool, but he still fell. Firstly, he deceived Yuan Baozhen, and secondly, he deceived you. Xiao Ju said casually, this person is very good at deceiving people. What was a blind person like? Stumbling and panicking when there was no one around, they couldn't do anything. They were very pitiful. This was the impression that ordinary people had of a blind person. Yuan Baozhen and Fei Nu were ordinary people. Naturally, they would think the same. Seeing He Yen fall and be helpless, it was exactly what a blind person would look like. But He Yen was not an ordinary blind person. Even if she was blindfolded, she could still shoot better than other people. Yuan Baozhen had never seen He Yen shoot an arrow while blindfolded, but Fei Nu had seen it before. Even so, even he overlooked this point. Deceiving you is secondary. The person he wanted to deceive the most was Yuan Baozhen. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said that there were flying insects in the wine. There were flying insects in the wine? How could this be possible? It was not summer now, and the Sun residents paid special attention to this. There were wormwood sachets everywhere to prevent insects from flying into the wine. It was not easy for He Yen to think that there were flying insects in the wine. Young master, is he Yuan Baozhen's man? Fei Nu also didn't understand. If he was Yuan Baozhen's man, why did he have to be so suspicious? He doesn't look like it, but I can't say for sure. There was a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone on the table. Sun Xiangfu had specially arranged it. He didn't like these things, but he liked to pretend to be cultured. Xiao Ju found a brush and paper and wrote a few words. His handwriting was elegant and strong. It was very beautiful. When it landed on the paper, it was as bright as a person's. I want you to bring a letter to Lin Shuanghe. Young Master Lin. Fei Nu's calm face finally showed a surprised expression. Young Master, didn't you not allow young Master Lin to come to Liangzhou? He suddenly thought of something and said in disbelief, could it be Pian? The handwriting quickly dried in the wind. He put the letter into the envelope and looked down. It's for him, but not entirely for him. Fei Nu didn't ask any more questions. He put the letter away and tiptoed out. Xiao Ju saw this and laughed. Why are you so careful? The people outside have already woken up. He said. Young master? Fei Nu was stunned. Forget it. When it comes to deceiving people, you are no match for him. Xiao Ju shook his head and said lazily, in any case, he doesn't have the guts to come in. Fei Nu stood in place and thought for a while before leaving the room. After he left, Xiao Ju flicked the wick of the lamp. In the light, his eyes were bright and oppressive. Su Jingfu, the night swallowed his whispers. When He Yen woke up, Xiao Ju was already gone. He seemed to be very busy these 2 days. When He Yen woke up, he had already left. When he came back, He Yen was already asleep. They didn't even see each other. She guessed that what Xiao Ju was doing was related to what happened at the banquet at the Sun residence. However, she couldn't go with him and could only sit here and wait. But she didn't want to sit here and wait. Fortunately, after noon, when it was almost evening, Slave Fei also went out for some matters. Before he left, he reminded her to stay in the room and not go out to avoid trouble. He Yen nodded in agreement. In fact, He Yen thought that the Sun residence was not as murderous as Fei Nu said. From what happened at the banquet, it could be seen that the assassin's target was only Xiao Ju. Since Xiao Ju wasn't around, the manor was 70% safer. The remaining 30% might not be able to defeat her. This morning, He Yen took off the cloth covering his eyes. It was because the cloth had been used for 2 days and needed a new one. However, the physician in the residence was scared away by Xiao Ju last time, and there was no one to make a new cloth for He Yen. Although he took off the cloth, after 2 days, everyone in the residence believed that He Yen was blind and didn't treat him as an ordinary person. He Yen was the only one. When she took off the cloth, she felt that the sky was too bright and she still felt uncomfortable. Yesterday morning, when she took off the cloth in front of Fei Nu, her expression didn't change. God knows how much she wanted to cry at that time. It was too dazzling. In fact, He Yen had never been blind. That day at the banquet, the manservant who received Ding Yi's order had indeed thrown a handful of powder-like things at him. She blocked it, and at that time, her eyes did hurt. After all, she had been blind once before, and her eyes were more sensitive than ordinary people. Subconsciously, she felt that her vision was blurry and she suspected that she was going blind. But when she calmed down, she felt that she had actually avoided it. At night, when there was no one around, Hien secretly took off the cloth and she could see the light of the lanterns outside. It was just a mistake because she was too nervous. She originally wanted to explain the next day, but when the next day really came, she changed her mind. A blind person shouldn't be a threat. It was much easier to be a non-threatening person and get close to Yuan Baozhen than to be smart enough to discover the poison in the wine, young Master Cheng. So when she took off the cloth in front of Fei Nu, Hien didn't show the slightest bit of abnormality. She had been a blind person for a long time. She could imitate all the reactions a blind person should have, and no one could find anything wrong with it. But she didn't expect that Yuan Baozhen would be so cautious and especially come to confirm whether she was really blind or not. Because of this, Hien was in a difficult position. But at the same time, she was even more certain that He Rufei, Ding Yi and Yuan Baozhen had something going on. He Rufei must have been involved in the murder of Xiao Ju. Although she didn't know what kind of grudge He Rufei had with Xiao Ju, the enemy of an enemy was a friend. Now, she and Xiao Ju were on the same side. She had to find out what Yuan Baozhen and Ding Yi wanted to do. Hien tied up her hair and quietly went out. Everyone knew that young Master Cheng couldn't see. Other than going to the toilet, he stayed in his room every day. Moreover, these days, everyone in the residence was in danger. Sun Xiangfu was busy cleaning himself, so Hien didn't have anyone to care about her. Luckily, she had a good memory. On the first day she came to the Sun residence, she already knew the way to the Sun residence. But Hien didn't know where Yuan Baozhen lived. Just as she was in a dilemma, she saw someone walking quickly through the garden. It was none other than Ding Yi. Good timing. Hien praised her in her heart and quickly followed her. She moved very quickly and was used to finding a room to hide. Of course, because the Sun residence was luxurious, there were rockery and bonsai everywhere, giving her many places to hide. Along the way, no one discovered her. Finally, Ding Yi stopped in front of a room and pushed the door open to enter. For some reason, the room Yuan Baozhen lived in was very far away from the main hall. It was almost remote and there weren't many people around. It was autumn. In the evening of Liangzhou, the sky was already dark. Hien estimated for a moment and jumped onto the roof. She was small and thin. The roof had sharp corners and cornices, and there were carved stones everywhere. Hien lay on the roof and almost merged with it. She carefully searched for a long time and finally found a gap. She didn't know if it was because of the rain or the hail, but the fragile crystal roof was broken and there was just a gap. Hien put her face close to it and listened to the movement inside. Ding Yi walked into the room. "How is it?" Yuan Baozhen asked. Ding Yi shook her head. "I lost him." "You weren't discovered by him, right?" "No." Ding Yi hesitated. "I didn't dare to get too close in case he discovered me. He left early today and went to the east of the city. I looked for him in the vicinity but couldn't find him." Yuan Baozhen's expression was uncertain. "This Xiao Ju, what is she trying to do?" "She clearly got into trouble in the Sun Mansion, but she wants to stay in the mansion and go out every day. I don't know what she's doing. I keep feeling that something is wrong." Hien heard this and became suspicious. Did Yuan Baozhen ask Ding Yi to follow Xiao Ju? "Has the Yamen matter been settled?" Yuan Baozhen asked. "Ying Yue and the others are dead. There's no evidence. The spy in the mansion is also dead. Since Sun Xiangfu was notified in advance, there shouldn't be any problems." Ding Yi paused. "I still don't understand. How did Cheng Lisu know about the spy's movements? He was also the one who discovered the cup of wine. You think there's something wrong with him? But you saw it yesterday. He can't see. He's just an ordinary young man. Even so, I still feel that something is wrong." Ding Yi couldn't put his finger on it. That young man should be blind. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to act so well. The servants in the mansion also said that he stayed in his room all day and was guarded by Xiao Ju's bodyguards. From the looks of it, he really did look like a weak rich young master. However, Ding Yi still remembered that during the banquet, Cheng Lisu had looked at him. That gaze was fleeting, as if he had just glanced at someone else. However, at that moment, Ding Yi seemed to have felt the shock and anger in the young man's eyes. When he looked again, the young man had already looked away. It was as if what he saw was just an illusion. But was it really an illusion? Their conversation was lively, but He Yan's heart was filled with shock as he listened. Yue is dead. There's no evidence, she told Sun Xiangfu. This meant that the assassination of Xiao Ju was indeed done by Yuan Baozhen. Perhaps Sun Xiangfu had even helped him. Now that Xiao Ju was still living here, wouldn't it lead others to continue to harm her? As she was thinking, she heard Yuan Baozhen ask, "Has Brother He sent you any letters recently?" He Yan thought that this Brother He was most likely referring to He Rufei. Before Master left, he told me that I must succeed this time. Ding Yi said, "If I fail, I won't be able to answer to Prime Minister Su." Prime Minister Su? He Yan's heart skipped a beat. He Rufei asked Ding Yi to assassinate Xiao Ju because he wanted to answer to Prime Minister Su. In other words, He Rufei was working for Prime Minister Su? But who was Prime Minister Su? She knew the current Prime Minister, Su Jingfu, but she didn't know if he was the Prime Minister Su that Ding Yi mentioned. "We've already failed." Yuan Baozhen was half angry and half disheartened. "I didn't expect Xiao Ju to be so difficult to deal with. Now he's starting to suspect me. I don't know if I'll have another chance in the future. Xiao Ju is difficult to deal with, but he still has a blind nephew." Ding Yi said, "Since this person is blind and doesn't know anything, I think we can use him." "What do you want to do?" Yuan Baozhen asked. "Don't forget what I used to do." Ding Yi said, "I have my ways." Before he could finish, he heard a creaking sound above his head. A small piece of green fell. Ding Yi's expression changed. "Who's there?" He jumped out. Under the moonlight, someone's figure flitted past like a swallow. In the blink of an eye, she disappeared into the night. He Yan complained in her heart. Sun Xiangfu pretended to be cultured. Even the roof tiles were made of green crystal tiles. It looked good, but it was very fragile. Even a weak person like her would accidentally collapse if she leaned on it. What kind of logic was this? He Yan suspected that Sun Xiangfu was pretending to be weak. The purpose of using these tiles was so that no one could eavesdrop from the roof. If it was a normal man, he would have fallen down as soon as he leaned on the roof. Ding Yi was still chasing in the distance, but for some reason he didn't call out to the servants of the Sun family to catch the assassin. Perhaps he was hiding something. He Yan was familiar with the roads here. She hid left and right, thinking about the conversation she overheard. Yuan Baozhen came to Liangzhou, Ding Yi came to Liangzhou, and He Rufei came to Shuojing. They all had one goal, which was to assassinate Xiao Ju. And the three of them had to answer to Prime Minister Su. Now Xiao Ju was alive and well. All the men of sacrifice were killed. Yuan Baozhen was not satisfied and wanted to come again. Moreover, Ding Yi had his eyes on her, the blind and useless person. He wanted to use her, the blind person, to kill Xiao Ju. No matter how she thought about it, when one person used another person, it was nothing more than instigating a rebellion, holding her hostage, or being a weapon. Cheng Lisu and Xiao Ju were uncle and nephew. Yuan Baozhen probably wouldn't think of instigating a rebellion. So, there were only two possibilities left. He Yan was holding her hostage. First, He Yan didn't think that Ding Yi could defeat her. Second, she wasn't the real Cheng Lisu. Xiao Ju probably wouldn't do something so stupid as to surrender for the sake of her nephew. As for the third possibility, being a weapon, they forgot the most important thing. He Yan was not blind. She had been on guard against Ding Yi since a long time ago. While she was thinking about this, He Yan had already seen the house she lived in. The lights were on. Fei Nu probably came back. He Yan felt around her body. She put the cloth in the room. She thought about how she still had to act for Fei Nu later and felt a headache coming on. She was afraid that Ding Yi would catch up with her. She jumped forward and entered the room at lightning speed. When she turned around, she almost choked on her own saliva. There was a wooden bath in the room. Xiao Ju was sitting in the middle of the bath. The beauty was bathing. His skin was ice cold and his bones were jade white. The moonlight slipped in through the cracks in the window. His black hair was covered with a layer of cold and clear color. He looked particularly attractive. His shoulder blades were very beautiful. For a moment, He Yan's mind drifted elsewhere. She thought, when was the last time she saw this person take off his outer clothes in the Xianchang pavilion? The men in the army were mostly tough and rough. Su Zhiheng was probably considered gentle. However, Xiao Ju was different from them. He was handsome and strong. His waist was especially attractive. No matter if it was a man or a woman, they would all praise him when they saw him. It turned out that this person was not only good-looking, but his body was also different from ordinary people. No wonder he was called Commander Jade-Faced. He lived up to his name. The fog made it difficult to see his expression. Xiao Ju probably didn't expect that someone would suddenly barge in at this time. She immediately stood up, and with a splash, the sound of water was clear and crisp. He Yan. This time it was over. He Yan saw everything he should and should not see. At this moment, she was cursing herself in her heart. Why did she wear a cloth every day when she went out? Why didn't she wear it today? Or perhaps it would be better if she could not see. Second young master Xiao quickly picked up the clothes on the shelf and put them on. He looked at her coldly. The room seemed to have become colder. He was about to speak when he saw the young man in front of him open his hand and close the door. His eyes were calm and seemed to widen. However, nothing was reflected in his eyes. He said, Who is it? Second young master Xiao laughed at this clumsy acting. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.